Kurt. All right, welcome everyone. We have agendas back there where that gentleman is standing, getting one. And if you want to follow along, you can go back and get one. All right, so the first thing that we have to do are proclamations. Oh, I just want to remind everyone, if you could turn your volume down on your cell phone, that would be really great. It's kind of disruptive when it goes off when someone's speaking. All right, so first of all, we're going to proclaim the week of May 21st to 27th as Public Works Week.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Mark Teal, Assistant Public Works Director, and I'll be pretty brief, but I just wanted to share with you, as last week as I started to think about Public Works and 31 years being in Public Works and what that means and what I would say again this year. And one thing came to my mind that's a perfect example of Public Works, so if you'll bear with me, a really short story. Recently I had an opportunity to speak to a group of second graders about what it means to be in Public Works and what it means to be part of a community. And as I was thinking about how am I going to tell 7 and 8 year olds what it means to be in Public Works and what that means and those types of things, I was quite surprised at the amount of intuitiveness 7 and 8 year olds had. These second graders, you know, they didn't know exactly where their water comes from when they brush their teeth, or where the sidewalks get cleared in the winter so they can ride their bikes, and how they can get to school safely and those types of things. They didn't understand how those things happen, but they knew that somewhere and somebody was behind all of that happening. And that right there tells me that being part of Public Works and the men and women in our Public Works Department and throughout the country makes us proud to be part of Public Works and to celebrate this next week as Public Works Week. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and read the proclamation here. Whereas Public Works infrastructure, facilities, and services through the street, engineering, facilities, transportation operations, solid waste, and fleet divisions are of vital importance to the health, safety, and well-being of the people of Lawrence, and whereas such facilities and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of Public Works professionals, engineers, and administrators representing local government. These individuals are responsible for designing, building, and maintaining the transportation, storm sewer, and refuse disposal systems, fleet, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential to serve our citizens. And whereas each year, National Public Works Week recognizes the contributions of Public Works professionals and increases awareness and understanding of the importance of public infrastructure, now therefore I, Leslie Soden, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, do hereby proclaim May 21 through 27th to be Public Works Week. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. All right, so number 2 is proclaim the month of May as Mental Health Month. Thank you, Dave.
This is my 17th time and last time here for the proclamation of May as Mental Health Month. And I appreciate the opportunity to thank you as representatives of the city and thank the staff, thank Mark and his crew because of the use of the health facility and a major project coming out right up to upgrade that. I was happy to see Chief Khatib here because we are just ready to kick off our mental health co-responder program as part of the mental health team in the police department, and you will see, you will be excited to see the results of that commitment on the part of the city. Thank you for your commitment to the RAP program and all the things that have gone on over the years. So I thank you on behalf of Bert Nash, but I also this time especially thank you on my personal behalf.
Well, we'll certainly miss you when you're gone.
Thanks.
Thank you for your 17 years of service.
Thanks.
All right, I'll read the proclamation. Whereas the U.S. Surgeon General states that mental health is fundamental to health, personal well-being, family, and interpersonal relationships, and contributes to community and society. And whereas mental illness affects 1 in 4 Americans every year, regardless of age, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, or economic status. And whereas the guiding principles of community mental health care have always been comprehensive, cost efficiency, effective management, and high quality and consumer responsive services. Therefore, I, Leslie Soden, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, do hereby proclaim the month of May as Mental Health Month in the City of Lawrence and call upon all citizens, government agencies, public and private institutions, businesses, and schools to recommit our community to increasing awareness and understanding of mental illness and the need for appropriate and accessible services for all people with mental illness. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, and now we'll proclaim Friday, June 2nd, as National Gun Violence Awareness Day.
Good evening. My name is Claudia Olea, and I'm a longtime Lawrence resident and a member of Moms Demand Action, a grassroots advocacy group promoting gun safety and common sense gun legislation. And we have a newly formed Lawrence group that has been very active in advocating specifically against campus carry at KU and other issues that we feel are important. This evening, I'm here to thank you for declaring June 2nd the Wear Orange and National Gun Violence Awareness Day. This day was inspired by a group of Chicago teens who asked their classmates to commemorate the life of a friend, Hadia Pendleton, who was killed by gun violence. And the first Wear Orange event took place a couple of years ago on what would have been Hadia's 18th birthday. Orange is the color that hunters wear when they're protecting themselves in the woods. It denotes safety, and it was also one of Hadia's favorite colors. So wearing orange is about remembering Hadia and all the people who have died because of gun violence. It's not about choosing a side. It's about ending gun violence and saving lives. And we invite everybody in Lawrence to celebrate this day, National Gun Violence Awareness Day, also called Wear Orange Day, on Friday, June 2nd, as well as on Saturday, June 3rd, by wearing orange to your workplaces or around the town when you're doing your errands. And we're also going to be tying ribbons around trees, orange ribbons, to commemorate that in our community. And in doing so, we'll be joining hundreds of other cities throughout the country that will have other Wear Orange events, such as lighting up buildings with orange lights and having different gatherings of people commemorating this day. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I'll read the proclamation. Whereas every day, 93 Americans are killed by gun violence, and over the past 5 years, more than 200 Americans have sustained non-fatal firearm injuries. And whereas protecting public safety in the communities they serve is the highest responsibility of city government. And whereas by wearing orange on June 2nd, Americans will raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives stolen by gun violence. Now therefore, I, Leslie Soden, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, do hereby proclaim Friday, June 2nd, to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day. In the City of Lawrence, encourage all citizens to support their local community's efforts to prevent the tragic effects of gun violence and to honor and value human lives. Thank you. You got your orange on.
Yes, I did.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Are there any items that a member of the commission wishes to remove? Are there any items that a member of the public wishes to remove? Okay. All right, so nothing to exclude, but we do want to add claims in the amount of $4,033,192.93 for 202 vendors. Would someone like to make that motion? Oop, hey, there's one that's over $1 million that is listed separately, and that is the construction contract per bid number B1519 for project UT 1304, contract 4 for the Wakarusa wastewater treatment plant and conveyance corridor. And that one is $1,416,044.93. Would someone like to make that motion?
So moved. Second.
So motion made by Commissioner Amix, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So motion passes unanimous. Will you pass this down to Sherry, please? All right, so now we're going to move on to public comment. So addressing the commission, the public is allowed to speak to any items or issues that are not scheduled on the agenda after first being recognized by the mayor. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss, debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments, questions to the commission. So this is public comment about items not on the agenda already. I thought Dave was coming up. Guess not. Katie.
My name's KT Walsh, 732 Rhode Island, and I'm speaking only for myself. This is a question for city staff and perhaps commissioners. In casual conversation with a city staffer, he commented that because of a Supreme Court ruling recently on signs and sign content, that soon our sign ordinance will have to change along with ordinances around the country. And he didn't know all the details, and so I went online, and I haven't had time to dig deep enough because I can't really find it yet. So my concern is murals used to be listed under our sign ordinance, and then 4 cultural arts commissioners and 4 career muralists worked for a year to draw up and research a really good mural ordinance for Lawrence, which would take it out of sign department and into the art department. I have a concern, just how will this affect public art, the content of the art? I'm also just curious, how is this ruling going to affect our sign ordinance? So just for future. Thank you.
Can we get an update, written update on that when you have information?
Mayor, you'll actually see that hopefully in June as a regular agenda item.
Okay.
And we can work with the mural component of it is a part of what we're gonna bring to you with that. And
Okay.
in short, we actually are separating out the works of art from the sign code
Okay.
itself. So we're happy to talk to KT about that and others as we get closer.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? All right, so now we're on to our regular agenda. Once again, addressing the commission, the public is allowed to speak to any regular agenda item or give public comment after first being recognized by the mayor. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, state their name and address. Speaker should address all comments, questions to the commission. So number 1, we have received draft ordinance number 9324 pertaining to Community Police Review Board. Who is giving the staff presentation on this? Anyone? All right.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Maria Garcia, Assistant City Attorney. And the purpose of my presentation today is to review with you some provisions that have been added to the first draft of the oversight ordinance that you considered in December. There are a number of them, some of which are significant and worth mentioning to you at tonight's meeting. I just want to remind you that the ordinance is not up for vote tonight. It's up for discussion and direction, if appropriate, for staff. So this is another opportunity for us to have some good feedback on where the commission would like to go with this. So at the outset, I stated that this presentation reviews with you what has changed in the ordinance, but I would like to say that there is one major thing that has not changed with the ordinance that I'd like to review with you, and that is that the investigations into complaints against police misconduct under this ordinance would still continue to be investigated by the police department. So one of the overarching questions that you might have is, why would this ordinance continue allowing the police department to investigate the police? And the answer to that is a legal one. It's not necessarily a policy one or just good practice. There is some fundamental case law that we have to consider and keep in mind here. Our city attorney reviewed that case with you in December. It's Garrity versus New Jersey. It is an older case from 1967, but it remains good law today. And in a nutshell, it stands for the proposition that only an employer can compel a police officer to provide any statement in an internal affairs investigation. Police officers don't lose their rights against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment once they become police officers. So if they are ever investigated, it is only the employer that can compel them to make a statement during that investigation. So the brief facts, if I could review them in Garrity, were that a group of police officers was being investigated for a ticket fixing scandal. The employer wanted to interview them as part of an internal affairs investigation. The officers were ordered to provide a statement, and then those statements were later used against them at a criminal proceeding. That case made it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the court there held that an officer should not have to choose between job forfeiture and their right against self-incrimination when being faced with questioning. So they shouldn't be forced to choose one. So the compromise there was that an officer can be compelled to speak in front of their employer, but they could not have those statements used against them if there was a later criminal proceeding in the future. There didn't necessarily have to be one right now, but if there was a chance of one in the future, those statements could not be used against them. So that is the fundamental case that really is the backdrop for all internal affairs investigations throughout police departments in the United States. It's a critical case that we have to be mindful of when we're setting this up, and I hope that that answers any questions you might have about why the department would continue investigating officers. Are there any questions about that before I move on?
Is there any internal procedures that can be done that would make the public trust the findings from it?
I think that's the purpose of this ordinance, would be that a complainant, if they're not satisfied with the result of the internal investigation, would have an opportunity to appeal it to the board if that complaint has to do with racial or other bias-based policing. And then in that case, the board would review the entire internal investigation that was conducted by the police department and decide whether the conclusion reached was appropriate, whether more investigation needs to be made. So we're hoping that that is the purpose, it is the goal of this ordinance to be more transparent. All right, excuse me. So I'll just start with going into each of the sections. Section 1 is important because what it does is basically repeals the existing Article 25, Chapter 1 of our code right now. This makes it cleaner rather than adding all of these additions and amendments to the existing code. We would just repeal it and then insert this entire new ordinance. That way, the members on the board would also be on the same playing field. They'd have to go through the same qualifications as listed in the ordinance, which we'll talk about later. But this is really a cleaner way of instituting this board, which would be renamed the Community Police Review Board instead of the current Board for Fair and Impartial Policing. Second section discusses the purpose of the board, and the purpose of this board is really twofold. Number one, first and foremost, this sets up a partnership between the board and the city and the police department to help advise the police department in their policy development, education, and community outreach, and communications related to racial or other bias-based policing. So partnership is number one. The second thing which we're adding to this ordinance now is that this board would also be able to receive any kind of complaint from a member of the public and then forward that to internal investigations for investigation. If that complaint is related to racial or other bias-based policing, then the board could then later review it in executive session, which I'll also talk about later. So partnership and then receiving complaints as well as reviewing an internal investigation.
Can they receive complaints that are not related to biased policing?
Yes,
So they can receive any kind of complaints?
that's right.
Okay.
The ones that will be actually appealed and heard in more detail and in depth are going to be related to racial or other biased policing as written in the ordinance currently. We've also added a definitions section in the ordinance. First of all, we wanted to define what racial or other bias-based policing is because that's a critical phrase that's used in the ordinance when we say that only the appeals are limited to that. We took this definition straight from state statute, and as you can read it. And then we also wanted to define complaint. And Mayor, as you just pointed out, the complaint that can be brought to the board is very broad. It could be really as defined here, an expression of dissatisfaction that contains an allegation that, if proved to be true, would be a violation of department policy. So any type of complaint of misconduct would be received. And then, again, A would define it in more detail. Third, we've had some significant revisions to the specific duties of the board, and I wanted to point out subsection 9 for you. The board has the authority under this ordinance to receive complaints of alleged police misconduct. Those complaints must be forwarded to the police department for investigation in the manner in which any other such allegation of misconduct is normally investigated. So the current setup of the Office of Professional Accountability, they will receive that complaint from the board members and then conduct the internal investigation thoroughly. Something that we've added to this language that's important is the word confidential, or the phrase confidential manner. The board members would receive the complaints in a confidential manner, and what we mean by that is in a way that doesn't expose the private citizens' information or their name to the public, perhaps at the meeting, or the information of the police officer at a public meeting, trying to just keep it kind of narrow in scope at the outset so that the board member can receive it and then forward it to the police department. The board member would not be allowed under this ordinance to conduct their own investigation or ask any other probing questions of the citizen who's bringing the complaint. And the purpose of that is so that we have a board of the most unbiased individuals as possible. They shouldn't be conducting their own investigation because that might skew their opinion of something before they even receive the results of the investigation later. And then finally, once a board member does receive a complaint in confidence, they must forward that to the police department within 3 days. And the purpose of setting a time limit on that is for efficiency purposes, so that a board member doesn't sit on a complaint for an extended period of time, so that the police department can get started and investigate it as soon as possible. Some additional provisions under B1 are that the complainant can appeal to that board if it's related to racial or other bias-based policing. We have added 14 days for an appeal, which is standard for regular other cases that we see in Kansas. We can extend that if you'd like or narrow it, but the complainant would have 14 days from the date they receive the notice from the police department about the results of the investigation, and their request for an appeal would have to be in writing formally. So upon written request of that complainant, the board would investigate the matter. That review would take place in executive session, since this board would be subject to the Kansas Open Meetings Act and Kansas Open Records. Upon conclusion of its review, the board shall deliberate in closed session. And then based on their confidential review, the board members would submit a recommendation to the city manager, who makes the ultimate decision on discipline here in Lawrence under our city manager form of government. The board would not be able to make a recommendation on discipline, again, because that is not a body that is entitled to discipline the officer. They would simply make a recommendation on whether the investigation was conducted well, whether more investigation needs to take place, or whether OPA reached the correct conclusion. Membership, just like the board currently in the current ordinance is written, is going to remain 7 members. Membership is voluntary. No voting member shall receive payment for service on the board. Those members would be appointed by the city commission upon the recommendation of the mayor. And then, as in the previous or existing ordinance that we have on the books, the board has to reflect the racial and ethnic makeup of the community, and there may be a police representative that can act as a liaison to the board. This is a little hard to read since it's so small, I apologize, but I'll review it with you. So this is a brand new section that we didn't have in December. We took this template from Wichita, which is also drafting a similar ordinance for a police review board. These are a list of 11 qualifications or disqualifying factors that a person would have to meet before they could become qualified to be a board member. And the purpose of this, again, is to get a board of 7 of the most unbiased individuals that can fairly review evidence, that aren't coming in with any preconceived notions about one side or the other. So as you can see here, it would disqualify a person if they were a current police officer or a family member of a police officer. And likewise, a person would be disqualified if they have a certain criminal history. And that is very common, I will point out, for something like jury selection, for example, where a prosecutor perhaps would ask the jury panel, do you have any significant criminal history? Because if so, you might be skewed against law enforcement. You might have something against this particular police officer or the police department in general. And so again, we're trying to get the best and the most fair board as possible. And then in addition to those qualifications, there are some training requirements for board members. There would be a requirement to complete racial or other bias-based policing within 6 months of appointment. And they would also have to complete COMA and CORA training within 90 days of appointment, and city staff in our office would be happy to provide that training on open meetings and open records. The person would also have to submit to a criminal background check, which can be done with some ease within the city. It's $20 to conduct a background check through the KBI, and it is returned very quickly, almost automatically, when you put it in the system, so that wouldn't be any hang up at all. And then lastly and importantly, the board members would be required to sign a confidentiality agreement, agreeing that all information reviewed and discussed regarding the receipt of a complaint or post-discipline review of an OPA investigation will be kept confidential, and that they agree to not disclose anything they learn to the public. So confidentiality is unchanged from the original version that we showed you in December. Again, we're just trying to show the importance of keeping what board members learn in executive session and in their capacity as a board member confidential. Breach of that confidentiality agreement and this provision of the ordinance could result in a member's immediate removal from the board. But in addition to that, now we have also added 2508, which is a misdemeanor provision for breach of privacy. And it states that breach of privacy is knowingly and without lawful authority disclosing to any person confidential information received during a closed session of the governing body or a board established by the governing body. And that would be a Class A non-person misdemeanor. And again, the reason for having this is to hammer home how sensitive the information this board would be receiving is. It's going to be personnel information, which is not automatically open public record. They might be receiving criminal history information about a complainant, for example, and this is also not information that is generally open to the public. And so we just want to ensure the privacy and the safety of that very highly sensitive information.
Maria, I have a question. So would a member of the board be compelled to testify in a court of law if it went that far?
If it's a criminal procedure, then the defendant can never be compelled to provide a statement. They have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, but there would likely be an investigation. And if charges are appropriate, they would be brought to the municipal court for prosecution.
No, I'm talking about if a complaint was made and the board agreed with the complaint or whatever, could a member of the board, if for some reason there was a lawsuit filed about the case itself, would a member of the board be compelled to testify in a court of law if required?
So it sounds like you're asking more of a civil matter. So if there's a lawsuit, then they might very well be compelled by a subpoena or a court order to disclose that information. But in that case, it wouldn't be unlawful. So this ordinance would say it is knowingly and without lawful authority disclosing,
Okay.
but if you're ordered by a court through a subpoena or otherwise, that would be a lawful disclosure.
Okay.
2509 reviews the terms of the board members. I know there was some discussion at our December meeting about term limits and some interest by the commissioners. And what we've done with the language is, well, first of all, I'll say that I looked at 10, just a sample of 10 other boards that we have in the city, and very, very few of them have expressed term limits. In fact, a lot of the language says that it is the desire of the city commission to not have term limits. I know that we talked about it, but to be consistent with your direction in December, we have some language that states that now it's the city commission that appoints the board member and then reappoints them upon the expiration of their term. And so that really is a built-in term limit. The person will remain on the board for as long as they're effective and as long as the city commission wishes them to be on the board. And then meetings remains largely unchanged as well. There will be a board chairperson that's elected. The city commission will set the mayor sets the first meeting, and then otherwise the board will come up with how often they're supposed to meet, but it has to be at least quarterly. Subsection B is a new provision, and it states that the board chairperson may allow public comment during open meetings, but such public comment shall not include comments regarding individual officer misconduct, again, to preserve the privacy of these. There might be some cases where a complaint is brought against an officer and is completely unfounded, and so the purpose of this is to try to maintain and keep private those allegations until they are proven to be true, in which case the board would receive them and review it.
So if I'm reading this correctly, we're planning on holding meetings whether or not there are any complaints to be discussed?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Under 1-2510A there, that the plan would be to hold meetings whether or not there are any complaints to be discussed at the meeting?
That's right. The board, like I said, the purpose of which is not just to review complaints, it's also to help with policy development and any other matters that might help or benefit the police department. So there are other points of discussion.
So who would be the person or group that would bring policy decisions or policy discussions to the board? Is it the board who does that, or is it the police that brings it and says we need to look at this policy, or a citizen?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not currently written in the ordinance, so I don't have an exact answer for you. It could be any of the three or all of the above.
Okay.
Okay. Decisions and procedures of the board under 2511 sets up that a quorum of the board, so 4 members shall constitute a quorum for the purpose of transacting official business. The board will have to have bylaws that it deems necessary for its operation. Those rules, regulations, and bylaws will need to be submitted to you, the city commission, and shall become effective upon approval by you. Oh, and that was the last one. So that is a quick rundown of the major changes that we've made to the ordinance. One thing I forgot to mention was on the comment section on 2010. We have had several meetings with LPOA to discuss these changes, and subsection B about public comment is not one that we have agreed on at this time, but we'll continue meeting with them and see if we can reach a resolution. And I'll stand for questions if there are any.
Any questions for Maria?
Well, not to reopen the disagreement you have with the LPOA on this, but what, from your standpoint, would the purpose of public input be from people not directly involved in the case?
Well, so we don't have language from LPOA that they would recommend at this time. The question was whether to limit public comment and say, here's what you can talk about XYZ, or just leave it open and broad. So it's just language that we haven't refined at this time yet, so.
Is that relating to procedures?
Yes.
So this is not regarding complaints?
Right. So
Okay.
my familiarity with a similar proposal like this is citizens will come forward and make comments about procedures they'd like to have the police department considered. In many cases, the citizen might be surprised that there's actually a procedure in place. So I find it to be a pretty good exchange of the public coming in, finding out more about the police department finding out, you know, what's on the citizen's mind. And it creates a forum that you wouldn't necessarily have under our current situation where this is not established. So I think it brings the two together. And so the public will come in and comment that, well, we need a policy to deal with this type of thing. The officer isn't enforcing this. It allows for an exchange in a venue where you have a citizens board sitting there, kind of monitoring that conversation. And then they can take up those recommendations and make a recommendation. Ultimately, the police department would have the opportunity to engage in policy development or anything of that sort, or comment on policy development. Certainly policy that would be put in place by the police department, but if it were city policy, it would be coming through this commission, and it would all be a public discussion at that point. My view of all of that is that it just creates another venue for the public to feel like they have an opportunity to speak about police functions and activities to a citizens board, not necessarily, you know, directly to the police. They currently have the opportunity to say it directly to the police, and I'm confident the police would react that way. But this is kind of a different pathway for people to go, just like filing a complaint would be.
Maria, do you have additional follow-up meetings with LPOA to further define that section?
Since this is not up for vote tonight in front of you, we do anticipate an additional meeting, so yes.
Okay. One other question, and this is goes back to the complaint process, and just so that I know and maybe other people know. Do you ever get approached? First of all, we don't have a process in place to hear complaints right now.
Well, a person can file a complaint directly with the police department,
Right.
which is what we're trying to expand upon in the ordinance. So now there's an independent body that could receive a complaint in case somebody, for some reason, doesn't want to take it to the police department.
Okay. And how many complaints come to your office throughout a year?
City Attorney's Office?
Yeah. Any?
We don't investigate them. It
No, I
would
know
be-
that. I know that. But how many are attempted to begin a process?
Oh, I mean, just by somebody cold calling?
Yeah, yeah. Any idea?
Not, I mean, personally, not very often, maybe two times, maybe 3 times a year.
Okay.
I do have numbers on how many are brought to the actual police department.
Sure.
I'm not sure if you're interested in that, though.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let me find it. Okay, so, let's see. In 2016, last year, there were 17 complaints brought to the Office of Professional Accountability, 15 the year before that, 17 before that, 23, and then 27 in 2012.
Okay.
You have to remember, a number of those that could be initiated by a fellow officer as well.
That's true.
I had a question about the time frame. I know that the board has 3 days to report that complaint to the police. Is there a time frame that the police have to investigate the complaint?
I might ask Captain Brixius to answer that.
So generally, we have 90 days, but some exceptions could be if there's a criminal investigation going on or some other court proceeding that hasn't occurred yet. The policy is to typically wait till the court proceeding is through with to begin that investigation. However, the chief of police can make an exception to that, and we can begin the investigation earlier if we think it needs timely attention.
So would you foresee a situation where a complaint could be drug out over time without any resolution?
Well, I think depending on the criminal or court proceedings associated with that, I think that is certainly possible. Things that, in the past, things that are to the level of use of force or like a racial or other bias-based policing, I can't remember a time where the chief of police hasn't granted the approval to go ahead and start investigating that concurrently with the other investigation that's going on.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Do you have questions? All right, so we'll go to public comment.
Okay, thank you.
All right, is there any public comment on this item? Come on up to the podium and sign in and tell us who you are and say what you think.
Katie Walsh, frequent flyer. I'll be brief. I'm interested in who would give and what type of anti-bias training, because we know there is great anti-bias training and there is very unsophisticated, not so good. And so I'm interested that those people would be highly qualified. She had mentioned that the city commission would appoint the members of the board, and I'm wondering if that would actually be the mayor, or would the whole commission have to vote on who the members of the board would be? I'm wondering about that. Commissioner Amix, you had talked about how many complaints there were, and that's an interesting point, but one of the things that I think makes this so wonderful, I'm so in favor of this, and it's been a long time coming, is that for a lot of us, it's very intimidating to go directly to the police. A lot of people haven't had good experiences with the police in their lifetime. Recently, working with the NAACP and a lot of wonderful people in town, the police have made it easier to make a complaint. You no longer have to have a second witness. You no longer have to walk into the police department to complain, and you can do it anonymously, and those are great improvements. But this is another really great step to help people. Like Mr. Marcus said, it'll be an educational tool. I think it will be a way to get a citizen sounding board. Perhaps citizens will come forward and say, I know a way the police department can save a bunch of money. It doesn't have to all be negative stuff. So I just wanted to bring that up and perhaps get answers to those first two questions. Thank you.
We'll finish public comment and then we'll get answers to the questions. Any other public comment?
I'm sorry, I had one more. My sister was a cop, now she's retired. Would I qualify? Do they have to be a working police officer in your family to disqualify you?
Okay,
Last question.
I'll write it down. Any other public comment? Okay. All right, well, we have 4 questions from KT. Maria, where did you go?
I think one of them is gonna have to be police administration responding to it too.
Okay. All right, so first question, who gives anti-bias training?
I'm not sure the way it's laid out in the ordinance. We have several members of our police department who were sent to training by Dr. Lori Friedel, which is kind of a nationally known program for racial or other bias-based policing training. Each member of the department completes that, and I assume that similar training would be provided. It's actually quite an upgrade from the training that we had received in previous years of state mandated training, and it really helps you understand and see the world in a little bit different way.
All right, second question. The city commission or the mayor makes appointments, which that's Maria. Unless you know the answer.
I knew that the answer, but I'll let Maria answer.
So the ordinance as written states that the mayor makes the recommendation for the board member, but the city commission as a whole votes on that person.
So it's like how we do
Similar.
now,
Yeah.
where it's on the consent agenda.
Yes.
Appointed by
Okay.
mayor with the concurrence of the commission.
Okay.
Well,
I guess the third one wasn't really.
no,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's not appointed by mayor with concurrence of the commission. It is actually a vote by the city commission. So members will be appointed by the city commission upon the recommendation of the mayor.
So like we do currently.
But stand corrected.
I mean, isn't that how we do it for other boards?
Yes. There was another question about qualifications, whether KT could serve on the board.
Oh, yeah, retired police officers and the family.
Okay, so the ordinance does have a section on qualifications of somebody who is a family member, but it is limited to family members of a Lawrence police officer.
Just the Lawrence police.
Yes.
So if they're retired, then they aren't technically,
They're not technically an employee of the Lawrence Police Department.
so that would be okay. If your sister was a Lawrence police officer, retired. Okay, good. Okay, and the other one I think was just a comment about it being an educational tool. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right, so back to the commission then.
Well, I might suggest that staff does continue to meet with LPOA and see if there can be a final determination made on the language that, of Section B of, what was it, 2510, I think it was. Mayor, have you thought about, are you going to be placing this on the agenda yet this summer or in the near future?
The final ordinance, do you
Mhm.
mean? Do you have a timeline for that?
We can bring it back fairly shortly. It's in good form right now, depending on what's there. And my suggestion about the LPOA recommendations, if the staff is in concurrence with them, that's an easy recommendation, but if we're not, we'll just bring you back what they're asking for, and they can stand before you and make their argument to the commission as regards that as well, if in fact there's some disagreement.
Is that the only disagreement that the LPOA has with this?
I can't say with certainty right now. The LPOA has to bring this in front of the other officers, and to do that, it has to be the final version of the ordinance that's going to be presented to the city commission, and I'm not sure that this is it. So there might be more changes, but I don't know of them yet.
I would just say at the end of the day, it's a balance.
Yeah.
It can't just be the officer's determination of what this is. There has to be the balance between the police department and the belief in the community that this is an open process that they can pursue.
Okay.
But there has been obviously discussions with the LPOA.
They've had a lot of
Some-
input
right.
into it, and they've had an impact on the ordinance, clearly.
Okay.
Okay.
I would be interested in having term limits in the ordinance myself. I believe in term limits, and I would think that would avoid having somebody be on the board for 10 years, whatever, 15 years. I think change is good. So I would really like to have us consider having term limits.
I agree with that. And I'm interested in having a standard for our advisory boards of having term limits, rather than the open thing here. And I realize that this is a political decision, but that's where I am on it. And I think that, for example, here, if you had someone serve 2 terms and they wanted to serve again, they could rotate off a year, and then if they were that good, they could be reappointed again. So I think a break is a good thing.
So perhaps saying 2
2
terms in a
consecutive
row.
terms, yeah, right.
Consecutive
Consecutive.
terms.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. What do you all think about that idea?
Tom, are we looking at that as part of our change in our advisory board policy that we have now? Is staff talking about that any?
I think we're talking about it. I guess some of us come at it from a very different perspective. When you have complete authority to change out as terms expire, to put an artificial, and this is me speaking,
Mhm.
to put an artificial requirement how many terms you can serve, I question why you would want to do that. If you had a dearth of candidates standing before you for every possible opening, maybe that would be something you'd want to do, but you don't. You, at times, have, some challenges as to who do you appoint. And I think, going forward, some of you aren't going to be here when that choice gets made. And I always kind of look at those things as you're making a decision for a future commission, which is kind of in other parts of how we operate, not something that you really can do. So, I think term limits and all of that, it's within your purview. As the commissioner said, it's a political decision. If we get direction to include that, we'll include it. I'm telling you that, from my perspective, you have that authority already without creating an artificial limit.
I can only tell you, thank God there was no term limits in my life.
Well, you did go to the county commission and then come back
He took a break.
to the
You took
cell.
a
Yes,
break or
right.
2.
I had to sit- I had to set things up for
I
how
guess,
things are paid.
There's a loophole.
Mike, the difference I see is that we're going, if we choose to try to be reelected, we're going before the public, and they can term limit us. And I don't
Oh,
think
I'm
they
aware,
ever
yeah.
chose to term limit you, okay? And so
Could've.
I'm just saying that in this case, we're talking about appointments made by a body. These folks are not elected. So I'm real happy with the idea of term limits for our advisory boards.
Right.
One of the areas of the ordinance that I brought up a minute ago, and I still have some apprehension about it, is the meeting schedule. I'm afraid if we create a body that meets at a set regimented time, regardless of if there's a purpose for meeting. We've all been part of boards like that. Some of us are currently parts of boards like that have to meet even though there's not necessarily an agenda for meeting. And I think if you really want to create a body here that has actual impact, then one of the ways you do that is you guarantee that there's reason for meeting, not just because it happens to be the third Thursday of the month, or whatever the case might be. So I want to make sure that this body has a functioning purpose other than just to meet regularly.
Good idea.
All right. Are you looking for feedback from us on that?
I'm
Or you just throwing that
I'm
out
here
there?
all night. If you want to talk to me, you're welcome to.
Well, my hope is that any meeting that occurs has an agenda that has a proper public notification and good topics. That's my hope for any meeting.
So would it be a committee that looks at policy without having it brought before them? Or is it just if somebody brings a policy to them to say, hey, I want this changed, or here's a good suggestion? Maria?
So that is not written in the ordinance
Okay.
currently. We could certainly add it to be more specific, but all it says
No.
now is that the board reviews LPD policies regarding racial or other bias-based policing and makes recommendations to the chief on those recommendations. So it could be that they bring it up on their own, it could be that the police department brings it to them, or that a citizen wants to review it.
We could come up with some wording that suggests that they won't hold meetings when they don't have agenda items.
Yeah.
I think we can get to the same point where you're not just meeting to meet because of some schedule that,
Mhm.
when there is business to be conducted. Normally they could set their own, agenda schedule, but they have also the ability to cancel a meeting when they don't have any items to discuss. Because I agree, I don't think
Yeah.
you want people just to meet because you have a regular meeting schedule.
That makes sense.
I think we could come up with something that would satisfy, I think, the concern that the commissioner's presenting.
I think one thing here, and just a question, we started out as kind of a review board, and have we added this other part where it's a policy-making board now? And if that's the case, was that the intent?
I don't think
I
it's
don't-
policy.
No, they're not a policy-making
Okay.
board.
Okay,
They can,
that's for certain, they can hear it, though.
They can hear suggestions about policy improvements, engage the department in that, make recommendations back to the administration. If they're, the police department can actually incorporate the policies. The chief will tell you that they have a number of policies that are, exclusive to their departmental operations, and that might be the way the problem gets resolved. If it, redounds to a policy that is citywide in some fashion, would bring it back to the city for that purpose. So I think it's about opening up a communication with your community. As you heard our citizen comment, there is at times a reluctance to go to the police department. And sometimes it has nothing to do with a fear of our particular police department. Sometimes it's a cultural reaction. I mean, you've heard all the discussions about immigrants and their reluctance to go to the police. So this is an attempt to create a different venue, not just for complaints, but maybe some suggestions where they're dealing with somebody that's that's not, it's not in uniform, because not all cultures, have that kind of open approach that our department attempts to provide.
Well, I think that's a good line to draw as far as policy, because I don't think it should be a policy-making board.
No.
But they can bring policy forward and say, hey, we've got this suggestion, recommendation. That's different than making policy.
A lot of times, like I said earlier, I suspect that somebody will come up with a suggestion that we do something, and people would be surprised to find out that that's already ensconced in our procedures and policies.
So it's good to get that out there.
Yeah,
That's good.
I think that's the kind of communication tool it ends up being.
Okay.
Any other comments or feedback? If we do add the term limits, are we gonna have to stagger the starters?
We'll come back with some suggestions for
Yeah,
you to consider
okay.
all that.
Do you have all the feedback that you?
Unless there's something else you want us to alter in the policy.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
we'll look at meeting schedule and we'll look at term limits as you've recommended and come back
And
with some
people will have to
recommendations.
apply to be on here, and we're not ready to receive applications or anything
Not yet,
yet. That won't
no.
be until it's finalized.
Exactly,
I'm just getting that out there on TV right now.
right.
And I would just continue, just Mike said, is to continue to coordinate and talk to the Lawrence Police Officers
Yes,
Association.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's move on to item number 2.
This time, Mayor, I'd like to recuse myself from this vote. I'm a property owner on the street in question.
Okay. So number 2 is to conduct a public hearing regarding blighted conditions of the property located at 2719 Rawhide Lane, and consider adopting resolution number 7206 requiring the property owner to abate the property within 20 days of adoption, and further directs the city to abate the violations if the property owner fails to abate as ordered.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Brian Jimenez, Code Enforcement Manager for the city with Planning and Development Services. I'll keep my presentation very brief because I know there's a full agenda tonight. This is Resolution 7206 for 2719 Rawhide, much like a few that we've brought to you in the recent months. This one's long overdue. Basically, we worked with the property owner last year. Where there were some improvements to the property, such as painting the house, and believe it or not, the yard, the pictures that were shown in the conditions shown in the pictures that were presented to you are the best that the property has looked. In the past, it was much worse. In addition to this resolution, if you adopt it tonight, we will go abate the yard conditions within 20 days of this resolution adoption. Also, it's important to note that we will be executing a search warrant tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock on the inside of the house. PD, the police department will assist us with to make sure that our entry is safe, and then once we do that, they will probably leave the scene. So depending on those, I don't know if it's warrants coming back to you with a unsafe structure resolution in the future. It may. I will know more tomorrow after we complete that inspection. So that might be forthcoming down the road shortly this summer regarding that. What we're asking for is adoption like the other resolutions we presented to you before. If cleanup doesn't happen, we will go do it for the property owner and then assess it back to the property as permitted by code, by state law, and go from there. As far as I understand, our owner was receptive to us in the past. We can't locate him, and it's my understanding he's currently residing in the Douglas County Jail. So I'll stand for questions if you have those.
I have 100 questions. So I'm sorry, Brian. I was trying to think of how to ask this. So do you think we should go ahead with this action despite the fact that you're going to do this inside action tomorrow?
Yeah, they're completely separate. Tonight's resolution gives us the authority to basically clean up the yard.
Mhm.
Tomorrow is a separate action that we're gonna go and look at the structure itself and on the inside. If we proceed with that in the future, then we'll have a different resolution coming back for you. We'll set a public hearing date, after a couple publications of that in the local newspaper. Then we'll set a public hearing date to come back before you with a new resolution on the structure itself.
Mhm.
We've had these in the past where we've had the same situation. We tried to get them simultaneously before you. It didn't work out this time. So yes, my answer.
So is there
no.
anyone living there now?
No, it's vacant.
So it's vacant?
As far as,
Um,
yeah,
So this person's in jail.
that's what I'm being told, yes.
Do you know for how long their sentence is?
I don't know. I did speak to a police officer out in the atrium the night before the meeting, and it could be a while.
So, I guess we've given up hope that the owner will
Completely,
do something
yes.
if they're in
Yeah.
jail. But
When
then
we-
again, it also seems
When we get before
kind of
you-
cruel when it's not possible for them to
Well,
do something.
let me just answer that question.
Yeah.
We've given this person plenty of time,
Mhm.
okay? When I come before you, it's all working with a person has been exhausted, and we try to give benefit of the doubt that it's not gonna happen here. I'm very confident of that.
Mhm.
Mayor, I do think it is important for you to know that the neighboring property owner has contacted me, talked with me extensively, has talked with Brian and code enforcement staff, and is very upset about the current situation.
Mhm.
And they certainly want to see the issue resolved related to the outside. Was also interested in, as Brian said, what the condition might be of the property itself, the structure itself. But I think it's important for you to know that we have received a serious complaint
Mhm.
related to that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Question.
Yes.
Brian, when did this process begin? How long ago?
It was last August, September, October. We worked with the person. We were originally told that the house was going to sell, so we watched that really closely. And, we met with this person multiple times at the property.
That was before that he was incarcerated?
That was before he was incarcerated, correct. I don't know the time period when he was taken into custody on his charges. But I think it's fair to say that he presented a good response to us initially, and we encouraged him to sell the property if he couldn't manage it and take it further. He did start doing some minor remodeling stuff, taking things out. I think the previous owner was probably a hoarder, and he inherited a bad situation, and it appeared on the surface that he was going to rehab the house and live there. Unfortunately, that did not happen. So that's where we are. That's where we're at tonight.
So if the city abates the violations, is there a bill that they attach to
Yes.
the house,
What
or?
What we'll do on the yard is basically the costs that it takes to clean it up is then assessed to the property. If it's not paid, which typically it's not, it's then put on the tax roll, so to speak, and go from there. That's how that works. Demolitions, the worst case scenario, we've been before you before on demolitions. And in that case, in fact, we just, glad to announce, we took 1305 New Jersey down yesterday and today, so that's a vacant lot that was before you not too long ago. But in that situation as well, whatever it costs for that demolition to occur, we then assess back to the property. And then if it sells, it's there, it's a lien.
Any other questions?
Mm-mm. No,
Thanks.
thanks, Brian.
All right.
So
Is there any public?
Do you need a motion to open a public hearing?
Yes, I do, thank you.
I would make a motion to open the public hearing on this item.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Amix, seconded by Vice Mayor Boley to conduct the public hearing. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. So the public hearing is now open. Is there anyone that would like to speak about this item? 2719 Raw Highline. All right, would someone like to move?
Motion to close?
Second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Amix, seconded by Commissioner Larson to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right.
Here, I think it's a bad situation that we have a property owner that is not in a position to take care of the property, but at the same time, I mean, this process began 8 or 10 months ago, according to Brian, and that this was before his luck changed, and I think that we have a responsibility to the adjoining property of the complainant in this case, and we'll go ahead and begin this process and adoption of resolution number 7206.
Are you making
I
a
would
motion?
make that motion.
I'd second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Amix, seconded by Commissioner Larson. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay. So motion passes 3-1. All right, so on to number 3, conduct a public hearing and consider approving a distance limitation waiver for Sully and Hanks located at 602 West 9th Street.
Mayor and Commissioners, the item before you is a distance limitation waiver. Brad Walters of Soley and Hanks is seeking a drinking establishment license at 602 West 9th Street. This location is within 400 feet of 9th Street Missionary Church. City code prohibits the sale of alcohol within 400 feet of a church or school, so the applicant has petitioned for a waiver of that restriction. The church was notified, and to date, staff has not received any communications at all, so no objections to this. So tonight, the recommendation is to hold the public hearing, and then if you determine the sale of alcohol at this location is not adverse to the public welfare and safety, you would then grant the waiver.
I'm curious, the words regarding a drinking establishment license were redacted from the
Right.
agenda. What was that about?
It was just put in there incorrectly initially. They can't even apply for the license until we grant the waiver.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so this is going to be a public hearing as well. All right, so any questions for staff? All right, so
Motion to
I'll-
open the hearing.
I was about to do, you can second it.
Second.
Motion made by Mayor Soden to open the public hearing, seconded by Commissioner Amix. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous. So the public hearing is now open. Do we have any public comment on this item? Solly and Hanks, distance limitation. All right, come on up. Just sign in and say your name and,
Brad Walters. I'm the owner of Soden Hanks and also the Basil Leaf Cafe. Just looking to open another restaurant. I'm a food guy. I'm not a bar and grill guy. I'm not looking to bring a bar in. It's just a nice little family restaurant, and I'm just looking to get a little extra money for the alcohol side of it, so.
thank you. Do you have any questions for the applicant?
Got good food.
Any other public comment? All right, so I'll move to close the hearing. Would you like to second it?
I'll second that
Mayor,
Be quiet.
Mayor makes motion to close public hearing, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous. So back to the commission. I don't really see any problem with this, do you?
You don't think it's going to adversely affect the public health, safety, and welfare at that location?
Thank you for stating that so clearly.
No, I mean, I'm asking the question.
I could go ahead and make
I
the
don't see it's
motion,
gonna be a
but
problem.
I wanted to get your feedback first.
If it's like any of the other restaurants he's done, it's gonna adversely affect my waistline.
That's right.
I'm all for it.
That's right.
No, I think it's a great idea. I've been wondering for a long time what's going on with that. That's great.
That'd be a nice space.
All right, would someone like to make a motion?
I make a motion that we approve it.
All right, I think I have to read the whole thing. Do I need to read the whole thing for that one, Sherry? Okay. Were you gonna second it?
Sure, second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Larson, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous. All right, so now to number 4. Conduct a public hearing regarding distance limitation waiver request for the 2017 Live on Mass event to be held Saturday, June 24th from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. in the 1000 block of Mass Street. Consider adopting ordinance number 9358, allowing the sale, possession, and consumption of alcohol in the public right-of-way during the event, and consider approving a street event permit and a special event permit for the event.
Good evening, Mayor, again. That's what I was going to say. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark.
This is Live en Masse event. It was, the applicant had applied for the transient guest tax, sales tax grant, and was awarded $15,000 for this event and for the next item, number 5. It's the same event, it's just on 2 different dates. This item is on June 4th from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. It will close the 1000 block of Massachusetts Street. The reason tonight that you need to conduct a public hearing for a distance limitation waiver is the Greenhouse Culture Church that's located on the southwest corner of 10th and Massachusetts is within 400 feet of the perimeter of the event, and under current ordinance requires you to grant them a waiver for that. Also tonight, during that, so you'll have a public hearing for that, and then if there's no comment, by the way, we haven't received any feedback from the church. They were sent the notice as required by the ordinance 30 days in advance of tonight, and they haven't provided any input or comments about the event to us. We also, as we do with all the events in downtown, notice was sent out to the surrounding businesses and community throughout the area, and it was reviewed by the different staff agencies that review the event, and we didn't have any feedback or comments about that as well. So after you have the public hearing, you'll be asked to adopt ordinance 9358 on first reading and approve the street event and the special event. One of the things that the Planning Department and Public Works is trying to do with the events now is put all the items for an event in one package so that it makes more sense for you when you're looking at them. And so the special event that's part of the planning for the private portion of the event on the private property is also one of the actions tonight. Mike Logan is here. He's the event applicant from the Granada. If you have questions, I'll be glad to stand for those.
Any questions for staff?
I do think.
Yeah.
Mark, how far out did we notify property owners or business owners? Is it just on mass?
Let me look real quick, Commissioner Amix, to see what the notice radius was. Actually have a map I'll put up for you. The green dot is the church. No, I'm sorry, I have to reorient myself to the map. Now it's probably backwards for you all, sorry. South Park is in green here. The green dot is the Granada, where the event will be held. So we notified west through to Vermont Street, east, looks like, to the alley on New Hampshire and down to 9th Street. The notice also goes out to East Lawrence Neighborhood Association and also goes out to Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods and as an email notification of the event. We hadn't had any comments or feedback from any of those organizations.
No. My question is, we didn't get anybody comment from that whole district that we sent out?
I have not received a single comment, no. I know Mike maybe can talk to you. He has, as he does with all of his events, he has talked to many of the businesses in person about the event. Sure.
Come up and say your name.
We have to. Mayor Soden, Commissioners, Mike Logan, I'm the organizer. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the event. This event really couldn't happen on any other block of Mass Street. It's a very special block because we have a lot of vacancy, we have a lot of service industry. It works. Currently, I have a sign off from every single business on my block, which, like I said, I don't think could happen anywhere else downtown. If there's any specific business or organization that you would recommend us reaching out to, we're more than happy to. This event only works and future events only work if we take care of our neighbors and we take care of the neighborhood. So it's very important to us.
Any questions for applicant?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
Is it just on the first one, or are you looking at both?
We're gonna do it one at a time.
Okay.
Would you like to make a motion to conduct the public hearing?
Yeah, I would, yeah. Make a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll second that.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Amix, seconded by Vice Mayor Bullock to open the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So any public comment on this event? We're gonna do it twice, so if you don't get it in on this one.
This is June 24.
This
Right.
is, yes, June 24th. Thank you, Sue. All right, so I'm going to move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion made by Mayor Soden, seconded by Commissioner Herbert to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, so any further, is that the speaker outside that we're hearing?
Yeah.
Just wonder why it sounded oddly all of a sudden. Thank you, Diane. All right. So, any issues, any concerns?
It sounds like Mike's done his footwork and got all the approvals and appreciated that, so I don't have a problem with it, I guess.
Yeah, Mike, I think you guys have done a really good job of staying in contact with your neighbors. That's excellent.
All right, well, I'm going to read this entire paragraph here, and whoever wants to make the motion can yell out at the end of it. All right, so the motion would be to find that the proximity of the temporary sale of alcoholic liquor for the event is not adverse to the public welfare or safety, and grant a distance limitation waiver. Adopt on first reading ordinance number 9358, allowing the sale, possession, and consumption of alcohol in the public right-of-way on Saturday, June 24, 2017, in the 1000 block of Massachusetts Street, and approve a street event permit and a special event permit for the event.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Herbert, seconded by Commissioner Amix. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So on to number 2, which is pretty much the same thing, except for July 2nd is the next date.
Mayor, that's correct. This is an identical footprint. Everything's the same as the last item. The only thing that's different is the date. It's on Sunday, July 2nd. Would you like me to go into more detail, or is that enough?
Are there any questions for staff?
Just one. This is probably for Mike, actually. You know, on Sunday, church is going on. What time does the music begin?
The gates for the event would open at 6 p.m. And
Okay.
we have
It's on Sunday at 6 p.m.?
a Sunday at
Okay.
6 p.m. Our setup does begin at 11, and the Greenhouse Culture actually has a service at 11 a.m. So we're making accommodations to allow angled parking on Massachusetts Street. That would be heading south with a turnaround for their guests. And we're actually on the 24th making the same accommodations for Crandon and Crandon, who provide an eye doctor service. They see patients from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., so we're able to provide parking and a turnaround, and it won't affect the event setup.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is I go to church at First United Methodist, and I know our choir will be singing at the same time. I'd hate to see them have to compete, you know, so.
We won't drown it out.
Any other questions for staff or the applicant? Okay, so now let's conduct the public hearing. I will move to open the public hearing.
Second.
Motion made by Mayor Soden, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So the public hearing is now open. So this is your second and final opportunity. Okay, so I'm going to close the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mayor Soden, seconded by Commissioner Amix to close the public hearing. Any final questions for staff or the applicant? All right, so I'm going to read this whole thing
Let's
again.
vote on the closing.
Excuse me?
Can we vote on the closing of the public?
Did I skip it?
Did we vote?
Did I skip it, Sherry?
You just closed it. Yeah.
Okay.
You had a motion and a second.
But we didn't vote to close it, is what you're saying.
Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying, I apologize, yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Do we need to vote?
Yeah, we should probably vote. All right, so all those in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion passes unanimous. Thank you, Stuart. All right, any final questions for staff or the applicant? All right, so I'm going to read this big sentence again. And whoever wants to make the motion can yell it out. So the motion is to find that the proximity of the temporary sale of alcoholic liquor for the event is not averse to the public welfare or safety, and grant a distance limitation waiver, adopt on first reading ordinance number 9348, allowing the sale, possession, and consumption of alcohol on the public right-of-way on Sunday, July 2nd, 2017, in the 1000 block of Massachusetts Street, and approve a street event permit and a special event permit.
Mayor, I make a motion to grant the distance limitation waiver.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Larson, seconded by Commissioner Herbert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Should we take a short break?
Mayor, excuse me.
Yes.
You might want to also take the action on the first reading as well.
Did I skip part of the sentence?
Well, I think the motion was just on the distance limitation waiver.
Oh.
I caught that right?
Well, the mayor read the entire statement.
Just want to make sure that's the intention.
Yeah, that is the intention.
We want to do it correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, well, let's take a short 5-minute break, and then we will come back. Right.
It disappeared for a while. I was trying to figure out what the time.
Are we all ready?
Let's do it.
Kurt? All right. So let's bring it on back. So number 6, 7, and 8 are all about the 1100 block of Biltmore Drive. Are we going to discuss them all at the same time in the same presentation?
Separate motions, but we'll present it all together, and you can discuss them and open the hearing for everything. And I would remind you that you need to declare ex parte communications at some point before your vote.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and read out the descriptions of what we're going to do, and then we can do ex parte for all 3 of them, of the agenda items. All right, so number 6 is we're going to consider a comprehensive plan amendment to amend the boundary of the Oriad West Research Park for the undeveloped properties north of Legends Drive. Number 7 is to consider a request to rezone 25.4 acres from IBP to RS7 located in that area. And then number 8 is to rezone approximately 10 acres from IBP to RM12D located in that area. So if we could go down the line, starting with Lisa, to declare ex parte.
Yes, I had a meeting with Lori Huffles, who it was. Yeah, there she is. And we just discussed the neighborhood's concerns, or she did with me, the neighborhood's concerns with this rezoning effort.
Mayor, I would just remind you, if there's any concerns that you hear from your discussions that aren't in the record, please declare those for the record.
Okay.
I also met with Lori Huffles, and we discussed neighborhood concerns and process. I had a discussion with Commissioner Penny Van Aken, and she essentially stated to me, we ran into each other, and she stated to me what she said at the Planning Commission meeting. I talked to my dad about it, and I'm Boley, but we didn't talk about anything outside the public records.
I spoke to Lori Hutflis as well.
I spoke to Lori Hutflis and about process and the application, so, but nothing different than the others.
This will shock you all, but I did as well. I think her concerns are documented as well. We did talk a little bit about the school district, which I don't believe is part of the staff minutes, but in terms of how that will affect school boundaries and such, with 104 homes where they originally were not planned. So.
All right, great. So now we're on to the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Sandy Day with the Planning Office. So as you summarized, we have 3 items that we will be considering. This presentation will cover all 3 of those, the comprehensive plan amendment, as well as the 2 zonings. The reason for the comprehensive plan amendment is that there is an inherent conflict in the comprehensive plan as it is written today. In Chapter 3 of the plan, it shows the area, the slide on the left here, also the area highlighted on the slide on the right in Chapter 7. They're both the same area. The map on the left shows that property as being low-density residential, and then in Chapter 7, the more recent of the 2, it is identified as part of the West Oriad Research Park development area. When property was originally annexed into the city limits throughout the 80s and 90s, the zoning that was applied to it almost automatically was RS7. In today's zoning, that would be RS1. In today's zoning, that would be RS7. So the map on the left really reflects what that was when the property was annexed into it. Chapter 7, the more recent plan, reflects what that district looks like today. The district boundaries have expanded and contracted over time. The district was much larger at one point in time. It has been reduced, especially farther to the south, and has been developed with residential uses. Part of our review of this application looked at, first, what is the impact of reducing industrial inventory within the city based on this application, and also looking at the need and inventory for residential lots for development. The next few slides we'll go through will just kind of highlight what that IBP district is. It's Research Industrial Business Park is what it's very commonly referred to. It's the only IBP zoning that we have in the city in this location. There's 4 quadrants of it that we looked at. An area that is north of Legends Drive. That area is located here. There's an area between Legends Drive and Bob Billings Parkway here, south of Bob Billings Parkway, and then to the east of Wakarusa Drive. All total, the area is about 230 acres, and of that, about 111 acres is developed. There are 9 acres that are specifically dedicated as open space, and that area is located on the back side of the Ironwood subdivision, and it separates the developable lots from the residential uses further to the west. Within this district, I mentioned there are around 111 or 113 acres of developed land. Within the district, there are still quite a few parcels that are undeveloped that are within the district and have a potential or opportunity for similar development. Most of the development that has occurred within the district is located along Wakarusa Drive. That focus really started down here at Bob Billings Parkway on the south side. That was a joint KU and city project, I believe, in the early 80s. That progression of development has moved upward along Wakarusa Drive and outward just a little bit. So to put this application request in context of the district, on the left side is a blue line that highlights the portion of the district that we're talking about. And on the right, the applicant's request for 25 acres of single family, the RS7, and then about 10 acres of the duplex zoning, RM12D, within this area. Total application request is for 35 acres of potentially 119 that is undeveloped. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The Planning Commission also considered on the same April agenda the preliminary plat for the Alphabet Edition. It's immediately south of this project, and that is a replat of those industrial properties and reconfiguration. It still retains that green space here we see along that far western edge, and I'm just showing this to you for, again, some context. This area is part of the IBP district. Some of the surrounding uses within the district that are related to this request, the RS7 is up in this area, and the proposed RM12D is in this area. We looked at what are the land uses and how have the lots been developed over time. So what you see in this particular slide is that within the IBP district, these parcels are part of a group of land uses that fall into that research category. The rest of the lot development that we have seen so far has been office, medical office. There's an extended care facility, which is a residential use, as well as some uses that fall into the commercial categories within this district. Overall, in the IBP district, that kind of land use occurs throughout the project. With the remaining undeveloped areas within the IBP district, within the area that we are talking about right here, there is 41 acres of undeveloped land. The applicant is requesting 35 of those acres to be rezoned. Part of the Planning Commission's recommendation and part of staff's recommendation was to retain a portion of that area where it is adjacent or across from already developed or pending industrial development, and that occurs along this section of Research Park Drive and along this section of Legends Drive. And then this just summarizes what those other 3 areas of the IBP district have by way of development opportunity in the district. Excluding the applicant's request and making the allowance or the reduction for what was actually recommended, which was 30 acres of rezoning rather than the applicant's requested 35, that leaves us with still almost 40% of this district that's undeveloped. We also looked at the idea or the issue of having a reasonable amount of residential lot inventory. We looked at the 2016 residential lot inventory report, and within that, of new subdivisions, we have approximately 2.5 years of capacity. And overall in the city, that includes new subdivisions as well as older subdivisions that may not necessarily have full infrastructure available to them, about 7.2 years of that capacity. So the comprehensive plan request is the first step in the applicant being able to proceed with the 2 rezoning requests for RS7 and RM12D. The image on the left represents the applicant's request and the configuration and how those 2 districts would be adjacent to each other, how they interface with the surrounding zoning. The image on the right is staff's recommendation to the applicant, and this was really provided to the Planning Commission as a graphic representation of what staff was recommending to them. We did not define exactly where this boundary or that boundary should be, but that the idea that this area within the IBP district be retained. Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation for the comprehensive plan to you to go ahead and support that amendment as we've talked about, and then also supporting that a piece of that be retained. I think I'm still going forward. So just in a bigger picture context of what this development looks like in the surrounding context of the neighborhood, the Colonial Edition, which is a fairly low residential development, as well as Fox Chase East. Ironwood Edition is an existing project with duplex housing. It has obviously a higher density in the surrounding area. The proposed request is very comparable to these 2 developments. The rezoning report assumes approval of the comprehensive plan amendment. The property has remained undeveloped since its annexation and creation into the district boundary, and that occurred, I think, in the 90s. This would extend, if approved, that residential pattern that we just saw within the immediate neighborhood. And then the RM12 district provides itself as a transition district between the single family to the north and west and to the remaining IDP district that we see to the south and east. We did recommend that the applicant reduce that total area to retain a portion in the corner, and this was the applicant's response. And what you see here is a concept plan of how they envision that those lots and streets may lay out. This is a design exercise that will go through a preliminary plat process. That's a piece that's still yet to come forward. We have been talking with the applicant as they prepare to make that application. What this graphic shows you is the RS7 district, the remainder of the RM12D district after the IDP is accounted for. So they have not tried to expand that duplex zoning any further into the area that they were originally looking at. And this kind of example is consistent with the recommendations that were forwarded to you. Because we did not have exact legal descriptions at the time, we have not at this time prepared ordinances. Once the applicant submits the preliminary plat, we'll have a better idea of what exactly those boundaries will be, and we'll be able to get the legal descriptions from the applicant and provide those ordinances to you, so that if you approve this, those ordinances will be coming forward separately.
Cindy, I have a question, if I
Yeah.
could. If you go back to that, the City Commission has no authority over the plat other than to accept the dedications of easements and right-of-way, correct?
You will see the final plat when it comes forward.
Is the
You will not
final,
see
is the final plat our approval, or is that done by the Planning
your
Commission?
acceptance of easements and rights of way. You do
That-
not
that's all
approve the
we have.
design.
So here's my question then. Under the old layout of the IVP zoning of this, the layout of those streets, were they to come south on Biltmore and the other street to the west there and
Research
cut
Park
through that
Drive.
neighborhood? And also to connect to the north there with the
Biltmore?
roadway coming from the north?
We have seen a number of different concept designs before this request, and there were plans that showed Biltmore Drive coming, extending south, curving and connecting back up to where its existing street configuration alignment is today. And then I believe Research Park Drive was designed, and I think that's why the property lines are the way they are, that it had a curve and curved into Biltmore Drive. Biltmore Drive has been constructed at the north end as a dead-end street with the expectation that someday it would be extended. This is a significant issue for the property owners and for the neighborhood, and I'm sure they're going to talk to you about that, whether or not that street gets extended. A design consideration that the applicant is showing in this configuration, I'm not asking you to weigh in on that design, but they're showing an offset between Biltmore, so it's not a straight line through. They're also showing potentially some easement that can be provided, some buffer yard between the two residential subdivisions. That's a design consideration that we were looking at. We have been talking with the applicant about pedestrian connections. The city owns a piece of land here that's along the gas line easement. There is another piece that is owned by the development group that could provide an opportunity to extend the rest of the trail system down along that gas easement and provide connectivity to Legends Drive. Those are all design considerations we look at with the preliminary plat that would be forthcoming, but that doesn't come to you. Just the easements and the rights of way come to you.
So then, whatever plat considerations we have, they really don't count, because whatever the planning commission really wants to approve, they have the authority of the plat, and only the dedications are going to be our responsibility.
True.
So if we don't like this design of street network, which is probably ultimately what it's going to look like, we better say now, because, or get ready to not accept dedications.
That would be good direction for the applicant to have an idea of where you're looking at, yes.
Okay. I just want everybody to be aware of that.
Mayor, if I may, and Sadie may be getting ready to state this, I think that majority consensus of the Planning Commission, after hearing the neighborhood's concerns, concluded that many of those concerns are addressed at the plat stage, and they were looking forward to seeing that plat in order to mitigate some of those concerns for buffer area, for pedestrian access, for the way the corner lots faced, and that sort of thing. So I think that's worth saying too, if you didn't pick it up in the Planning Commission minutes.
We're almost done here. You have recommendations for approval for the CPA as well as the two zonings, with the understanding that the zonings were reduced from the applicant's request to retain a minimum of 5 acres at that corner. The options that you have for consideration are to approve the request, modify the request. You may return those applications back to the Planning Commission, or you can deny those requests.
The Planning Commission votes were 7-3 against. What were the 3 votes against? What were those about?
No, that's the one thing I didn't go back and
From the
reread
minutes,
the minutes.
it looked like the votes were largely that they didn't see there was significant reason to modify the long-term plan.
The commission, I think, really had a very healthy discussion about the balance of industrial land versus residential land. And even though this property has been vacant for a very long time, there certainly was an opinion on the commission that maybe waiting a while longer may result in some other
Can you go
project
back to
within the district.
The historical slide, one of the very beginning ones.
Sure. This one, perhaps?
Yeah, thank you.
There we go.
Any other questions for staff?
Did you have a question about that?
What sort of businesses are, that can be built on that property now under the
So
current
IBC?
zoning? Is there-
Many of the uses that we see today, a long-term care facility, office, medical office, Certainly research, some very limited manufacturing, maybe some options. We have more typically seen office and medical office uses.
Okay, thanks.
You know, here's a case where I think infill development versus industrial ground is kind of the debate here. And I don't know if we as a commission have gone out and looked at a new industrial site somewhere, trying to develop or select industrial ground. But it's hard. It's hard to go out and point to an area that ought to be zoned industrially and put that star on a map somewhere, snowflake I think they were, weren't they, Scott? And trying to have the debate on where industrial ought to go. And granted, we have added Venture Park since the last time, since this project came along. But it's hard for me, I mean, to think about turning industrial ground back over to another use when it's so hard to create. I mean, it really is. I mean,
Well,
and then it's hard to argue, the zoning in this particular case, because you're really downzoning the property to like the least dense use that we have. So, but I just think it's really hard to get that industrial property. You're hard to find it.
Well, this is when comparing it to Venture Park is, I kind of envision that as being a little bit heavier industrial.
It is.
Whereas this is more like the office research type, which is really invaluable, I think. For
Where else do we have it?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Any other questions for staff? Did you have any more on your presentation?
I do not.
Okay. Shall we take some public comment?
Sandy, why don't you leave the options back up? please?
Oh, sure. Yeah, bring the options back up. I just want to ask, if there's a lot of people speaking, one thing that a past group did was one person gave the formal presentation, and then other people came up and basically said ditto and were nice and brief. So feel free to even do something like that if you wish, or just say in your own words what you like. But you look ready, Lori. Come on up to the microphone.
Mayor, did you want the applicant to present first, or?
Yeah.
Oh, is there an I'm sorry. That's why I was asking if there was any more to the presentation.
Staff's presentation is concluded.
All right. Sorry, Lori. You gotta wait.
I'll be quick. Good evening, Mayor, City Commissioners. I'm Jason Hoskinson with BG Consultants. I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant, current property owner, and developer of the project. Staff did a great job outlining the general idea of what our project looks like, what we're trying to bring forth tonight, and hopefully move forward through the process, through the planning process of platting and working through staff recommendations. I don't want to add a tremendous amount to what Sandy mentioned. I do want to point out a couple things, though. Commissioner Amix talked about infill development. I think this is a perfect opportunity for an infill development project. We're looking at growing our community without expanding our boundaries. Property is currently underutilized. Tax base is next to nothing on it. You imagine 100 houses plus 3 more IBP lots. I think there's some significant economic revenues that can be generated through that. Property taxes, sales taxes, and a number of other things. The project's going to result in a more connected community. We're going to be connecting streets, sidewalks, utilities, basically enhancing the public service in this area, allowing city staff, the city departments, to perform the service in a better fashion for the citizens of Lawrence. The rezoning request, of course, we're trying to, we want to do low-density residential in this area. The reason for that, and Sandy kind of showed some information there on one of the slides, the inventory of lots available on the west side of town is decreasing significantly. We've got home builders that are coming to us, to our client, saying, where's my next project in a couple, 3 years? Most of the lots that are undeveloped right now in that area are spoken for under contract. they're gonna be built soon. They're gonna have houses on them soon. So we're looking at 2 to 3 years out, where's that next development? I think this presents a good opportunity to do that. It's consistent with the surrounding land uses around there. The owners, okay, so we've got 35 acres basically zoned IBP right now. Sandy mentioned there's a tremendous amount of undeveloped IBP property through there. Of all those lots, the land available for development in that area, this is really about the least marketable IBP portion in that whole area. The streets are built to it, but there's no infrastructure within it. If we look at the average lot size in that IBP Oriad West Business Park, they're about 2 to 2.25 acres. That would result in roughly 16 IBP lots within the request that you see tonight. All of that's going to require extensions, utilities, and a number of other things to it to make it developable and marketable. All the remaining lots to the south of there, the streets are there, utilities are there. We just have to get a building permit and connect into the utilities, and those are ready to go. So from a demand standpoint, there is a low absorption on the IBP, a slow absorption, and I believe this particular property is probably at the bottom of the list of when it could potentially be absorbed. So the project we're presenting now is an opportunity to utilize that space and make our community a better community. The one item I would add, and Commissioner Amick started talking about this, yeah, giving up industrial, I understand it is a question you really have to wrestle with. There is and Scott can add to this as well, KU's master plan has plans for more business park research type use on the West Campus, which would be more or less in direct competition with this particular area. That is something that's been added relatively recently, triple P type improvements and things of that nature. So again, it further diminishes our ability on the private side to market this and sell it as IBP property. So those are the main things I wanted to mention tonight. I'll be here tonight to answer any questions from the commission. Would like an opportunity to address the commission after public comment, if you'll allow. But I hope tonight, as we look at this, we really consider the benefits of the project as it's presented tonight. I think it's going to be a good thing for our community. We've gone through a pretty extensive neighborhood involvement process. It's not something you typically see with developments. I had public meetings before we even submitted the application. Tons of phone calls, met with neighbors, had neighbors over to our office to talk about it. We're looking at extraordinary setbacks to try to maintain some of that buffer space and keep some of the elbow room that the surrounding neighbors have within this area. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back to you guys, allow other public comment, and if you do have any questions now, I'd be more than happy to answer.
You said you had extraordinary setbacks. What are those?
Yeah, okay, let me elaborate on that just a little bit. So the RS7 backyard setback is 30 feet. That's in our development code as the City of Lawrence Development Code. In an IBP district, that setback when it's abutting an RS7 lot is 40 feet. So we're proposing 40 and potentially even more depending on how it shakes out. We're proposing an extraordinary setback to where the buildings, the houses, are no closer to the residential lots surrounding the west and north side than if an office building was put in there. So we're trying to keep that space back. That also gives us some opportunities. We've been talking with Lori and a number of other neighbors here tonight about providing landscaping berms. Does a number of things. It helps us control drainage. I know there's some drainage concerns with sheet flow, stormwater just running off of this property and right through neighbors' backyards. Well, this project presents an opportunity for us to improve that. There's some storm sewer capacity available. We can alleviate some of those concerns, maintain as much trees and landscaping as possible, transplant trees, do whatever we need to do. I mean, we're really trying to be transparent in the process and work with the neighbors and make this a community effort. So.
Any other questions for applicant?
Yes, sir.
Jason, you bring up an important point about KU and their future land use development and you know, the research and property that will probably compete. But can they have for-profit properties on their property? KU?
I don't know the answer to that. Scott, I don't know. I know you guys reviewed that document.
The way I understood their master plan was that it was going to be a public-private, at least the opportunity for public-private partnerships, research and development type uses on their west campus. So again, we haven't seen anything past the master plan. It came up during the discussion with the Planning Commission about what's changed over the years since we've had many discussions about protecting industrially zoned properties. So that was one of the things that have changed.
And I just bring it up again because I know it's the last piece that we kind of have. Those are the last acres that we have, unless we go out and create new.
Exactly.
So,
I have another question for Scott. Are there for-profit companies located in the BTVC?
As far as I know, there are I think Diane knows more about it than I.
And some of those properties are actually on KU endowment property. So there's as opposed to the state of Kansas one.
But there are for-profit companies in the BTBC.
Yes.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's endowment property that is being referred to here as KU property.
I don't exactly know who
Well, it's
owns
part of
it.
the KU master plan.
Right, but it
is
is
the
part of
point.
KU master plan, so.
Yeah, the connection to this property was we had a discussion about the type of industrial uses that we're looking to either preserve or will be needed to look in the future to get more of, like Venture Park, like East Hills, some of the manufacturing, the primary job employers, and that the KU master plan's call for those types of uses is new information since then.
Any other questions for applicant? All right, thank you,
Thank you.
Jason. So now we're ready for public comment. Just sign in and say your name and tell us what you know.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners and City Manager. I want to start out by saying how much I appreciate the work that you've done as far as transparency. We've lived here, well, many of us from this neighborhood have lived here for more than 20 years, and it's nice to see the transparency that you're trying to input to the city government, although there's always been transparency with Mike Amex, and we appreciate that. I'm here tonight representing the neighbors here and also the neighbors on our petition, which are notarized but unfortunately didn't make it in by your deadline, so I will give those to staff or whoever wants it. The main points that I want to make: we really do appreciate what Jason has done to try and speak with us and share with us the ideas. However, we all feel a certain amount of pushback because we feel rushed. It's a complicated process. It's our backyard. We've lived there for close to 20 years, most of us. And this area, as we've always understood it, and there are a couple of people here that have fought rezonings on these areas in the past, was that that area was zoned light industrial from the time that we bought the property, and that it was possibly going to change, but we had all come to accept that. Knowing that this change is possibly going to happen, I think for us, the changes come very quickly. And it's the whole process, because we are all just neighbors and having to learn the planning commission process and having to learn the city commission process has been challenging. And trying to herd cats is also a little bit of a problem. What I can tell you is, ultimately, if it ends up as residential, it ends up as residential, and we're grateful that it's Jason and his group. What we'd like to see happen is to have this whole discussion sent back to the Planning Commission, because I think we have a better understanding now of what exactly has to happen on our part to express our concerns. Before we all went in there, and I've expressed this to some of you, with pictures of our kids playing on the land and our dogs on the walks. And it became clear to the people that were at the Planning Commission meeting that they didn't care about our dogs and our walks, and they didn't care about the kids playing baseball or airsoft. They were more interested in the business aspect of this. So knowing that the business aspect is where we need to be, I would love for you to re-refer it back so that we could take a look at it for the financial reasons related to the fact that if you give up industrial land, there's nothing west of Iowa. We're it. That's number one. Number two, there's been no research done related to the schools. Already there's development behind Langston Hughes that goes all the way to K-10, and they're already overcrowded at Langston Hughes right now. So there's nothing north of 6th Street that could be less than a half a mile away of kids that will be allowed to go to that elementary school. I know development's happening all over town, but if we can slow that process and really think about the impacts that we're having, I know our neighborhood would appreciate it, and that's all I'll say.
Lori, can I see the petition?
Yeah.
What is the criteria for a petition again?
It has to be here by,
A protest petition, a legal protest petition, has to be submitted within 14 days of the hearing to the clerk's office. And then we analyze it for meeting some criteria to make sure that it's valid. And if it is valid, it triggers a 4 out of 5 vote to be able to approve the zoning.
So it'd be a super majority.
Yes.
Thanks, Lori.
It's no price tag.
which neighborhood are you talking about? Right off of, what's the best way to describe it? How do you guys want
West of Walker East, south of Harbor, north of,
The property line?
Do you guys want to see this?
15.
We can put it on the Elmo too.
Bob Billings, Bob Billings, north of Bob Billings, Legends.
yes.
Legends.
All right.
I do have a
Go ahead.
question about when the property was zoned, because when I read through the planning commission minutes, who was it? Von Aiken, I think, made a comment that in 2006, the property was zoned IBP. But I've also heard conversationally that it's been that way since
the 80s.
the dawn of time. I mean, where are we talking in terms of when this property was zoned industrial?
We can find that out for you, Commissioner. Because we may be talking about the comp plan as well, so we'll clarify that.
Okay.
It's been a while.
I'm just trying to figure out if his comment is just simply incorrect, it's in the minutes.
I don't think it's incorrect. I think what you'll find is that the type of industrial changed over a period of time. Because when we bought our house in the 90s, we knew then it was research park.
And that's why I'm wondering what the significance of 2006 was.
Well, and one of the main points that's been made is that the land has been sitting fallow and that nothing's happened on it. But one of the greatest concerns that we have about that is, well, we've gone through 10 years of a pretty serious recession in this community, and businesses were certainly hit hard. My husband and I own a business, and I can tell you that it changed the way that we developed our business as well. And the importance of looking long-term is really what we look to the commissioners to do. And so we'd really appreciate your help on that. Thank you.
Mayor, we can respond to that question. The property was rezoned to IBP in 2006 with the adoption of the new land development code. Prior to that, it was zoned M1, which was a research industrial zone. That was established through multiple annexations and rezoning requests from 1983 to 2003. That's part of all that action and movement we had in that area. So it was basically zoned industrial research.
1983?
Since the 80s, yeah.
So this property has sat vacant without any movement since 1983.
But there was none previously out there.
Yes, give or take, yes.
Okay.
That's, sure.
You gotta remember Wakarusa Drive was not redone until 1988, time frame 1988, 89, so, there would have been no reason, to really have developed to the west side of there. A whole lot of things out there. Scott, wasn't some additional stuff added as far as uses as part of the IBP in 2006?
Yeah, I think it was a new district, and so that M1 converted to IBP. And over the time,
restrictions were pretty tough as the M1, if I remember.
yeah, the primary, if we haven't done an exhaustive review of the analysis of the districts, But, you know, skimming some of the use table, the primary distinctions between the IBP and the IG, for example, Venture Park and East Hills, has to do with that heavier manufacturing use, outdoor uses, for example. One of the primary uses between IBP and residential are cell towers. So, I mean, if you're, it may be helpful at some point to kind of have us review those for you and let you see it's not, if we reverse this, one of the discussions we had at the planning commission is if we had RS7 out there today and we were proposing an industrial district, that's when we typically get a lot of the opposition. Here we're taking industrial and going to RS7, and all of the discussions about the amount of industrial land are valid, but I guess what was a little bit of a challenge from our perspective was seeing all the opposition to go to a like use in this area, because it's typical that gets some support usually versus the other way around. But
Shall we get back to public comment?
Please.
All right. Any other public comment on this item? Just make sure you sign in and say your name.
I'm Jeannie Ricky, live at 1308 Morgan Court, which backs up to it. We're along the pipeline. We've been residents for 2 years. And first of all, I really appreciate what the zoning commission did for us. Been very thorough, you know, pros, cons, through all that. Appreciate that. Having said that, I support Lori's suggestion that we return this request to them. Just have more discussion on it. Like to see more consideration given for green space, since we don't have any parks, we don't have any neighborhood parks west of maybe Monterey. Given that that doesn't happen and that you do approve it, we would really like to be notified in advance of any plating that's going to take place and what this is really going to look like. That's our concern, is what it's really going to look like. Because when we left here, the night of the zoning commission, we were told that we would be informed when this meeting would take place. And as that yet, we've not been notified. If Lori hadn't told us, and as has been discussed, Lori talks, we wouldn't have known. So we would appreciate being informed, because if we didn't know and we were at the meeting, I guarantee the rest of the people that might have had seats in the chairs didn't know. So, but we really appreciate your consideration.
I just got a quick question about the notification. Is that something that was promised by the planning commission, or?
I don't recall that statement coming up. It's not typical that we would provide that statement at planning commission level, because we're not always sure ourselves when this lands on the city commission agenda.
Good evening. My name is Steve Tolson. Thank you for hearing me. I live on Biltmore Drive, 1005 Biltmore Drive. We purchased that plot in '96, moved into our house in '97. There were cornfields to the west of us at that point in time. You know, again, I will ditto what's been said, again, to speed along. My biggest concern is the traffic. I did see where there was a shift in the traffic coming down Biltmore with a little offset. Just to remind everyone, when we bought the land on Biltmore Drive, it was actually called Research Park Drive. We purchased there expecting or understanding that property would be further developed at a later date as industrial, light industrial. My biggest concern, and I'm sitting here, I've got a map on my phone. If you look at the area between 6th, George Williams Way, Wakarusa, and Legends, and specifically Harvard that cuts through there, I would challenge you to find another place that doesn't have, or that would have a more difficult time getting in and out of a specific area than what was presented. And again, I know that's not the final plan, what was presented for Biltmore Drive. Simple Lane, Stone Ridge Drive, what's this one? My point being, multiple ways in and out of the neighborhoods, again, between 6th, George Williams Way, Wakarusa. When we look at the property there, I know that there's an entrance from the south. I know if I was to buy in that lawn, I'd be going down Biltmore Drive. That's my biggest concern, is that just the abundance of traffic. That's not what we expected when we purchased, again, knowing it would change, but we expected the load that would come with an light industrial area. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other public comment? Nothing else? Did you have any rebuttals, I suppose?
Yeah, can I respond?
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to respond to a few of the items that were mentioned here, the school district, our company was actually involved with a number of the elementary bond issue improvements, including the Langston Hughes Elementary project. I did have some conversations with USD 497. Got an email here I can pull up. I basically notified them that, hey, this project potentially could be coming, and how might that affect your long-term goals? And the response I got from Denise Johnson, in conjunction with Tony Bear, and they work pretty closely with Kyle Hayden, we already expected to exceed capacity at Langston Hughes within 3 years. Any housing development in this area will force changes either to district boundaries or possibly some expansion at their facility. So within 3 years, regardless of whether this project moves through, they're already expecting to exceed capacity. They know this kind of stuff is coming. It's a challenging process. They have an outside consultant that helps. They come in and look at the demographics and where things are growing and age groups and all that, and try to best guide the school district on moving forward. On the green space and parks, we are trying to, by nature of the current subdivision development guidelines, sidewalks on both sides, connections through cul-de-sacs, there's going to be a lot more pedestrian connections out there right now. I know a lot of folks use this property, private property, to walk and trails and whatnot. There's still going to be opportunities to do that with the sidewalk connections. Our client did talk to Parks and Rec about making a park or green space within this area, and the response we got back basically was, we're kind of overstaffed and we're not looking to add more operation and maintenance costs onto our system, and would prefer not to have that. So that's why we don't see a central park or something like that right in the middle of this development. And I think that's maybe why you don't see that through a majority of those developments, subdivision developments that have happened west of Wakarusa. However, we do have that opportunity to connect directly into the Victor Park, which leads to walking paths and trails and a number of other areas out there in West Lawrence neighborhood. And then on the last item there, traffic. Part of the preliminary plat submittal will include traffic impact studies. We've looked at it initially already. The traffic volume, traffic estimates using standard engineering guidelines and projections. Traffic volumes under the current low density residential will be significantly lower than the daily traffic volumes that would be generated by an IBP district. Now the question is, how do they get in and out and around? And that's why we are looking at street alignments that maybe don't discourage cut-through traffic to drive through there at a fast rate of speed. We're looking at possibly doing some entry features into the neighborhood, ways to really split this apart, make it a nice neighborhood, a beautiful neighborhood, but discourage the cut-through traffic that results in high speeds. Again, also along those lines, there's development requirements for traffic calming devices in new developments. We'll be hitting some of those requirements, so we may have some speed humps and some other things there. So these are some of the components we're looking at. Our goal would be to submit preliminary plat next Monday. We're plowing forward with the design as is, putting together drainage studies, traffic impact studies, sanitary sewer studies, submitting that through on Monday. We're going to take it back to the neighborhoods, discuss it with them, get their input, and basically continue moving forward, because the more we step backwards and delay this, the longer it is before we can actually get infrastructure in the ground ready for the home builders to start building. And you saw the slide there. New subdivisions, we're down to 2.5 years capacity. We're at least a year out before anything could potentially even be buildable at this site. So we're trying to stay on top of it, move forward, keep the neighbors involved through the process. So, thank you.
Any other final questions?
Last one, the multifamily that's on the south, how important is that?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch
The
that.
multifamily on the south side of the project, how important is that? The RM, the multifamily.
Oh, the
stuff.
multifamily. I'm sorry. So our initial response, or our initial application was for 10 acres. That was pared down to 5 acres. We're okay with that, keeping the 5 acres IBP. Initially, we wanted to consider another rezoning to respond back to that and expand that multifamily a little bit. At this point, we're not looking to explore that option. There's a high demand right now for the multifamily townhomes. These are going to be townhomes that you'd see over in the Oregon Trail or the Coving, which is development right just by Langston Hughes, west side of George Williams Way, geared towards 55 and up. It'd be a homeowners association that takes care of the yards, maintains that. We'd have buffer yard spaces and landscaping around that between the multifamily and the RS7, as well as between the multifamily and the IBP. So our request would be to maintain that maintain the RM12D as shown tonight.
I got one question on that Biltmore Drive connection. If the industrial park would stay there, would that connect up with Biltmore Drive to the north?
We're not sure. A lot of options in that scenario. We've talked about it both ways.
So how important is the connection to Biltmore Drive for your?
We're okay not doing it. I mean, it would make our property more developable. We could get another residential lot in there. The question is, how does Biltmore Drive from Harvard coming south, what does that look like? How do you terminate that as a dead end? Is it a cul-de-sac that's created to the north of our property? I don't know the answer to that right now.
Okay.
Mayor, may I just add to
Sure.
my response is that all of our planning documents and transportation documents take us to the conclusion that connectivity is important there for that neighborhood. We know that's got some opposition, of course, but from a conceptual standpoint, it makes sense to connect that, whether it's business park uses or residential. I think the idea of connecting it from a residential standpoint is strengthened because it's primarily residential. Then it would be a nice mix of the residents and the business park uses there.
Scott, can I ask you to clarify that a little bit? Mostly to make sure I heard that correctly. If the vote is to keep this as industrial, and in the near future, when it does develop as industrial, the long-term plan for the city would be Biltmore connectivity, regardless of whether it's residential or industrial?
That is a possible staff recommendation as the plat moves forward to the planning commission, and then as that plat comes up for acceptance of dedications of rights of way.
If I may add one more topic on this particular discussion. We've had, in our discussions with the neighbors, there's some concerns with the gentleman that lives here, Mr. Timmons, and his neighbor across the street of, well, okay, I'm going to be potentially looking at backyards, a backyard abutting my side yard. With this connection coming through as we're proposing it, and we're going to be showing this on the preliminary plat, we're proposing that this lot and this lot, if you see on the slide there, have houses that face Biltmore Drive. So it would essentially, if you're coming off Harvard and you're looking down Biltmore Drive, house, they're all set back the same distance. Our goal would be to maintain that look all the way down to the termination point right here where you have the jog. So, I mean, keeping that, again, from a planning perspective, it's a good community thing. It allows us to connect sidewalks, streets, multiple ways for EMS to respond if need be to an emergency. And the solution we're trying to propose to appease some of the neighbors' concerns, we can do that with this. If we eliminate that, we'd be looking at backyards across all of there most likely.
So this map right here, you said this is the map that you plan on submitting on Monday?
Yes,
With the uses?
This would be our conceptual preliminary plat of where we would like to move forward with this project.
So that you would keep the IBP on the south side?
Yes, we are okay with keeping that 5 acres of IBP here. I don't know how marketable it will be, maybe a little more so with some of the infrastructure built around it. The dashed lines that you see right here, this is something an exercise we worked through with staff to make sure, okay, if we keep IBP, what might that look like? Is it gonna be usable? And these 3 lots potentially would match up to, say, the dance gallery, Lawrence Gymnastics Academy, similar types of uses here. You've got a Montessori school over here. This gives an opportunity to have 3 lots there. We've platted it as one lot. If somebody wanted the whole 5 acres and did something with it, great. If they want to split it off, that's fine as well.
Did that get to your question as well? You were asking about RM12D.
Sure.
Any other questions for Jason? No. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, who wants to start?
Well, may as well be me, right?
If you like.
Well, I'm here to tell you, in reading all this stuff, and you know, again, it comes back to single family versus industrial, and the fact that the industrial is already there. Scott, I appreciate you bringing up what would happen if the request was reversed, and you know where we would be going on this. And I think that the fight would be tough on trying to put industrial in this location. But the fact that the industrial was placed in early in the process and the development was allowed to come around it and everybody knew what it was going to be going in. And that's one of the things that we have tried to make as publicly known what was going to be there, or you know, that we advertised what was going to be there. And I think that this did that early in this process. Folks, I really hate to see us give up the industrially zoned property, because it's so hard to find for the future. Is this a good site for single family? Probably is, and for the multifamily portion. I appreciate everything that Jason, the applicant's done here, but at the same time, I just know that it's hard to find industrial property. It just is. And I still believe that the commission long ago did this one right, in that they zoned it up front so that everybody knew as they moved in, as the residents around it, that this was there and this was going to be there. So I look at that way. If we're going to do it another way, I would agree that we could send it back to have the planning commission, and maybe this is just simply part of the plat process, this traffic that I think is going to come through the area, both to the north and to the south. I did not drive to the far north and see of all the escape routes that I could end up going through there over the weekend, which was my intent. But I think that we need to be really careful of the traffic here. But anyway, and it's to protect the new area of development as well as the existing area of development also. So My first feeling would be to retain the industrial property. That's something that is really important for us to have, so.
I appreciate that, Mike, and I guess my concern in response is that this has been industrial property for a long time, and it apparently is kind of being eclipsed by the property to the south and what may possibly happen with KU. And you know, we have this situation where we're interested in infill development, and our inventory of buildable lots is pretty low. And I think that's the balance that we have to try to look at here. It's not an easy call, and I certainly respect your experience in trying to figure out how industrial property can be retained and developed. But I guess my concern is that if we want to do infill development, and this is a property that has been around for a long time with that zoning and hasn't developed, I'm concerned about that.
One of the things we know about Lawrence is that basically, demographically, since about World War II, we've added 1,000 people a year, I mean, give or take. And that doesn't show any sign of changing. And so I guess I'd have a couple comments. You know, one of the things is that at some point, we're going to have to find places to put people. You know, and one of the priorities of this commission has been infill development. The second thing I would say is a lot of the concerns that I read from the Planning Commission minutes and also, you know, that have been verbalized here are a loss of green space, and people have talked about, you know, a place where they've walked their dogs, that their kids have played baseball. But I think as a commission, we can't lose sight of the fact that that's not city green space. I mean, that's literally someone's private property. And the debate we have here today is whether or not they have the right to develop the property that they legally own.
So I am also concerned about the loss of industrial space, given the fact that this is the only industrial space west of Iowa, I believe it was, that, you know, I'm just concerned that everything winds up on East Lawrence or east side of Lawrence as industrial. So that's a concern. And I'm also, the traffic aspect of it, whether or not it could be platted so that it minimizes traffic through the neighborhood. That's something that could be worked out, I suppose. But at this time, I think I would be more interested in having the Planning Commission take a second look at it and have more discussions with the neighborhood.
I'm more interested in keeping it as industrial, for the reasons that Amix was talking about. And, you know, I guess I had a different take on the slide that had the development through the decades, which is why I wanted to look at it. It was, yes, it was slow to develop since the 80s, but it has been developing consistently, in my opinion. So I don't hear the argument that it hasn't developed since the 80s, when really that area has been developing since the 80s. Somehow I see that as the opposite is true. So I think we should keep it as industrial.
And I also add that with the industrial, it is also infill development when it occurs, so same effect there.
Yeah, I think since we're on that committee, you know, to me, keeping the industrial that we have industrial, that's really important to me. And here we have neighbors that want it to stay that way on top of that, so that's important to me. So what I'm hearing, go back, put my chair hat back on, is that we kind of have this split. Could you go to the options? Yeah. I'm hearing kind of a split here. I don't know if I'm the only one that would just deny it outright, because it sounds like Mike and Lisa, Commissioner Amix, Commissioner Larson would be interested in sending it back. Or are you interested in denying it outright? I'm also concerned about that protest petition that didn't get put in time as well.
Well, unfortunately, on the protest petition, we do have established rules that have to be followed on that. And I gotta imagine that there's state law that probably tells us when that happens too, along with our items that we have in place. It doesn't sound like to me that there's 4 members of this body that are ready to deny this request. So I think the only option that we have is to return it to the Planning Commission with some kind of direction of consideration, and have it come back to have it go through whatever process it has to go through after it gets back.
I bring up the protest petition not because I think we can magically
Right.
allow it to become part of it, but just, I guess my question is, if we send it back to the planning commission, does that give the neighbors time to have the protest petition apply? Would they have to do a new one, or how would that work?
I think we'd have to review that with the city attorney's office. The formal hearing has been completed, and it's a function of state law about the timing of that protest petition. So we'd have to review that issue of, I'm not sure it's a second hearing. That hearing is completed. It would just be a remand to the planning commission for more discussion. At that point, it's really just technically between the planning commission is my understanding, but we'd have to review that with the city attorney's office.
So you're saying that it's possible that the protest petition, if they did a new one, they actually wouldn't have an opportunity to do a second protest petition?
I believe that's correct. And all the protest petition does is require 4/5 vote for you to approve the applicant's request. What I do think is helpful is understanding if the basis for the concern is really the industrial component of it. If that's true, then you may, as part of your motion, if it gets remanded to the planning commission, direct staff to do more research and, see it in a few different ways and talk about the differences between the districts and the differences between some of the sector plans in the future. Part of the discussion has to be that we are against the boundaries of our city, and we're going to have to grow out or grow up. And that's part of now the reality of some of these zoning requests. It has to be part of the discussion, in my opinion, whether it's industrial, office, non-residential, residential, the gamut of uses. That may be part of what you ask for as well. If it's more design and trying to mitigate neighbor concerns, then there may be some opportunity to marry up a plat and the rezoning, and let's see them together. And one of the tools we have is plan development overlay. If this body wants to see the design in a more substantial, significant way, that's one tool that the applicant could revise their application, overlay the zoning request with a plan development overlay. That preliminary plat then becomes the site plan, since it's a residential request, that this body actually gets to see from a design component and not just the dedication of easements and rights of way. So that's a tool available to you if the basis for concern is merely design. If it's a combination, we can take on both issues.
Well, here would be my recommendation, Mayor.
Well, let me say this real quick. There's a lot to argue with about everything that you just said, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say that right now.
Against or for?
There's plenty to argue with, but now you can go.
Well, my recommendation will be is that we send it back with the direction that, as Scott and staff has brought up, the inventory that we need in residential as compared to the inventory that we need to have in industrial, and give us some further insight into that, have the planning commission give that consideration, or is that balance there? And if it is staff's recommendation, then at that point, to also include what you just brought up about the overlay on top. I think that would give us a better idea of taking into consideration what that street network will look like and whether or not it'll work. It's hard to argue with RS7 zoning. I mean, I've never done this, other than the fact that I know the importance, and I think the commission appreciates, all the commission appreciates the importance of having industrially zoned property. So we've all taken that into consideration, but I would just like to have the planning commission look at it. And is the inventory, by taking this out of industrial inventory, what kind of hardship does it present us in the future, okay?
And Commissioner Amix, I think the planning commission appreciates that position more than you know, because
Yeah,
they've been
I
in the
read that.
trenches to try to get industrial zoning on
I
the
know.
ground. And it became a discussion of the type of industrial and frankly, the ability to get more of it in the future from a business park standpoint versus the kind of the unclean industrial of our industrial, true industrial parks. So I think all of that needs to be vetted out a little bit more.
It's really important not to lose sight of what we do as a commission. I mean, we're in the midst of or at the start of a budget season where we're saying that we don't have the tax base necessary to pay for what we do, and therefore we're going to the taxpayers and asking for a mill rate increase on the proposed budget. One of the things that I've learned as a commissioner is that we sit up here as a governing body and we dictate parcels of land and we say this is where certain development should go, but the people who actually operate these businesses don't always agree with what the governing body dictates is the place they should go. And this is why we have vacant lots that we've sitting around the entire city that we think should be this but have never grown into this. As we look at this parcel of land, you're talking about, you know, the supply and demand lining up, that you have the demand for housing in this community, you have the demand for the need for subdivisions. We will be out of subdivision available land in 3 years. Some of you will still be on the commission in 3 years, and we will be out of land. And we have a tax base that cannot support what we pay for. So we ask people for more and more and more money. And the argument I'm hearing is that we need to preserve a piece of black dirt that somehow will generate a tax base for us that in 34 years has not.
People need jobs.
I agree with that.
One thing to also remember is just a few weeks ago, we had a discussion here, I think it was the Catalyst program, where Marilyn Bittenbender got up and talked about the inventory of industrial property available for renting or buying, and that we were at 2%. And she said, from a business standpoint, we would like for that to be at 8%.
She was
So we
talking
don't
about
have
heavy industrial, was she not?
Industrial, just
Because,
industrial.
I mean, you're not putting a factory on Research Drive.
No, I'm not saying you are.
And that's what she was talking about with regards to vacant industrial space.
I don't think she distinguished between it. So you know, we do have to have a certain level of inventory in order to bring in folks who might want to rent it or develop it, and we need to maintain a certain level. And we're being told that the level's low, and so it's hard to get good opportunities for folks to come in and actually rent or use the property.
You know, there is one other thing that we could do, is rather than send it back, one of the things that we do have the option is to table this item, and we could ask staff for specific directions or specific questions that we may have about this development. If it's something that's not really a planning kind of item, of sending it back and making somebody go through it. Some of the stuff would have, you know, one of the questions that I might have, is it the responsibility of the Planning Commission to make the determination of the level of industrially zoned property that we need to have in the inventory? Is that their job, or is that something that we can get from staff and bring this back over the next several weeks or whatever, and look at it that way? That's one. Two, one of the concerns I have is after it was brought up about the KU property and whether or not are they going to have so much industrial property for research and stuff that this is going to be eclipsed, you know, and or, you know, there's no way that we can compete against that. You know, those kind of things. So we don't have to send it back if it's those kind of questions that we want also.
I'm really interested in that question.
Okay. Okay, rather than send it back, Mayor, I would suggest that we ask our questions of staff and get further, rather than send it to the planning commission, and then we can hold the hearings here so that the neighbors and others and the applicant obviously can hear everything here rather than going back to the planning commission. Scott's absolutely right. In all the material that we read from the planning commission, this past weekend, the planning commission did a hell of a job in really looking at a number of the things that we have questions about. So my suggestion, I guess, would be, is that we defer these items, ask staff for additional information that we have, bring it back to our agenda at a later date, and make a determination at that point.
Is that acceptable to the commission?
Yeah.
Okay. I would do that. Matt?
Yeah, I'd rather have more information than less.
Do we need a motion to do that?
I would
Okay.
make a motion that we defer this item, and we ask staff to provide us additional information as it deals with the KU land in question and what those plans look like, and whether or not that's going to be used for-profit business, to make sure that the inventory is going to be necessary to be able to do that. Any information that we want on the street layouts?
Yeah, because you had talked about a plan development overlay. Is that what you talked about?
I was.
Is that-
I think we're talking about something different.
So that's
Yeah,
different,
I think
okay.
That,
Yeah. Where you can see the layout along with that.
I
I
think
think what
we've been
we'll do
shown
is-
the layout. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that
I
that's
was
going to
say
be the
we'll-
case.
we'll work with the applicant to make sure that's part of
Okay.
anything we bring back.
Okay. And Mayor, I would imagine that we can have this back in the next 3 weeks.
Do you think that that's enough time for you to gather your information?
I would rather be non-committal, and then we'll provide notice to the residents. We need to connect with KU, for example, and I'm not sure.
We also have some other agenda items that
Yeah.
are pressing on us
Yeah.
pretty soon, too.
Okay.
So we will commit in this meeting to send notice to the neighbors about the next meeting that you see the application back.
Okay. Well, I would make that motion then for deferral with the information requested.
I second.
Motion made by Commissioner Amix, seconded by Commissioner Larson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous. All right. We, what time is it?
8:30.
Let's see here.
That was for all three of those issues, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that
Correct.
was all
So
three
we're
of
on to number
those.
9.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I want to take just another real quick break. Just under 5 minutes. Let me just go to the bathroom real quick. Kurt. All right, so we shall continue on now. All right, so now we're on to number 9. Consider authorizing the city manager to execute a professional services agreement with a firm to conduct a transit center location analysis.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Brandon McGuire, Assistant to the City Manager. This item was brought before you almost exactly a month ago, April 18th. This is a recommendation to engage a recommended consultant in a study to determine the ideal location of the transit transfer hub. This is a second look at the staff proposal or the recommendation. At the last meeting, the last time this was presented, we asked for your permission to kind of take this back, compare notes, make sure that we understand why we're making the recommendation, and then provide a little more context for you all to consider the recommendation in. Just a little background, the study is funded by an 80/20 transportation, consolidated transportation planning grant. So $40,000 of the study costs would be funded through the grant. $10,000 would be funded out of the transit operating budget. Those funds are approved by the MPO and KDOT. If they are not expended, they're part of the portion of funds that the city would have to turn back at the end of the year. That's just how that grant program works. It is unlikely at this point, probably this late in the year, that we would identify alternatives for that funding source. This alternative uses for that funding source. This, we believe, is a top priority to inform this decision process, which is why we're recommending using the funding to fund this particular study. So the study is recommended based on a couple of factors. I sort of narrowed those down to 4 factors. I addressed them in the staff memo, but I wanted to kind of cover them tonight from the podium, and then engage you all in conversation and consider the request to pursue this study with the consultant that the staff is recommending. So the first factor is simply the fact that a permanent location is needed for the transfer hub. For several years, the city's struggled with this decision process. We've completed, obviously, a study prior to this. We believe, the staff believes, that the recommendations in that study have been exhausted at this point, possibly with the exception of the location at 21st and Stewart Avenue. So a decision for the permanent location is needed, and it's been needed for over 6 years now, as the transfer hub has been operating at a temporary location at 7th and Vermont. For a number of reasons, safety, efficiency, route planning, conflicting uses of downtown streets, the current temporary location of the transfer hub is not ideal, and it does not support the function of the transfer hub. The transfer hub is a critical element of the fixed route transit system, and the long-term sustainability and efficiency and the city's ability to provide a high level of service within constricted resources depends on siting the transfer hub at a location that supports the function. So that's the first reason why we're recommending this study, is to address that need for a permanent location. The second reason is that we believe the study will provide relevant and valuable information for the City Commission to consider in its decision process. As the staff, we're obligated to provide the best and the most relevant information for any policy decision that you consider. The results of the previous study, as I mentioned, have essentially been exhausted. So we don't have a lot to go off of in terms of presenting you with new information as you approach this decision. Our recommendation is that you would engage in this study, and you would be able to use that to help inform the future decision process. The third reason is that the approach to the study differs from the previous study. We intentionally designed the RFP to solicit a study that is going to provide a different result. That is our desire. It's not going to be the exact same locations. It's not necessarily taking previous locations off the table that may have been considered, but the goal is to provide a different perspective on this analysis. So based on input from the city commissioners, in discussion among the staff, the proposed study will explore the feasibility and alternatives that were not previously evaluated, such as public-private partnerships, multimodal concepts, multiple transfer hubs, and the potential maybe for a destination-type transit hub. Additionally, the previous study did not include a front-end stakeholder engagement process. As proposed, the recommended study will include a process that engages both the City Commission and stakeholders in identifying criteria that's going to help guide the study process from the beginning. And then finally, the proposed study, we believe, would benefit greatly from the recent completion of the comprehensive operational analysis. That's new information that we can factor into this location study process. And finally, the fourth factor that I wanted to provide as context for your decision is the alignment of this study process with the potential upcoming sales tax ballot issue in November. As you're aware, back in 2008, a 0.2 cent sales tax was approved by the voters to support transit operations, and a 0.05 cent sales tax was approved to support transit expansion through investments in capital. Since that time, almost 9 years now, the city has developed a reserve based on the funding or the revenue stream of the 0.05 cent sales tax. That I believe at the last time I looked at it is nearly $7 million. And that's funding that is available right now to invest, to fund this type of decision, as well as the subsequent decisions that would be made after we would develop a permanent location for the transfer hub. Subsequent decisions would be, for example, route realignments, new buses to support a higher level of service for particular routes, as well as permanent facilities and amenities in the field for riders. So in terms of the timing with the sales tax ballot issue, should the commission decide to place the renewal on the November ballot, we think that the public engagement portion of this location study is going to coincide very nicely leading up to the ballot or to the November election. And then we also think the timing of the election in November will coincide nicely with the timing of the completion of the study. So in November, we'll know whether or not the 0.2 sales tax for operations will be renewed. As you remember from the budget presentation, the staff is going to make a recommendation not to renew the 0.05, but rather to repurpose it. And so we'll know if the 0.2 operating sales tax is going to be renewed. And then at that point, a month later in December, we'll get the results of this location analysis. So you'll have a good feel, should that be the plan to put this on the November election, you'll have a good feel for the voters' response to the operating sales tax. And then a few weeks later, you'll have a location analysis in hand, and you'll be able to then pick up, we think, pretty seamlessly with the decision process for a transfer hub location. Should you choose to defer the study and do it after, initiate it, take it on after the November election, I think it would probably take several months to complete the study, and then we probably wouldn't be able to really start engaging in a decision process about a permanent location probably until late in 2018, I would imagine. So those are the four reasons that we've sort of tried to articulate in the memo, and I just wanted to reemphasize those here this evening and see if you had any questions, any other information that you would like us to provide, and then again just reiterate the staff recommendation to authorize the city manager to engage the consultant in the study process. So.
Questions for staff?
Yeah, could you go over again the timing of the report as far as, you said late 2018 that it would be?
Right, so if we were to initiate the study immediately, then we would get the results back in December of this year, 2017. So that would happen right after the November election, a month after the November election. If we're to wait until after the November election to even begin a location analysis, then I would doubt that we'll get those results back until later in the year of 2018, and then we would then engage you all in a decision process. So, so we're trying to keep, to do it above board, but to keep the process moving forward and to start developing information now as opposed to waiting to start developing that information. Does that make sense?
Any other questions for staff?
The exception, the 21st and Stewart property, that would be relooked as part of this study, is that what I understood, or would not?
Well, I think we want to start with a blank slate.
Okay.
I mean, we do have some data from the previous study that will most likely be useful, but in terms of looking at locations, we want to offer a new perspective. So I don't want to say that we would, exclude any particular property, but that.
I was just going to ask you.
Okay, but yeah, I would say that would still be a consideration if that's what the criteria drives the decision towards. We want to offer a new perspective.
When Brandon mentions that new perspective, what the study process the last time set criteria out based on staff recommended criteria to say, where's the most efficient location to run this based on where the routes all go, where the destination and demand is in terms of ridership. It didn't look at to say, what are our community values and how do we want this to look in our community and operate? So the consideration of how we looked at now the COA where we've said, well, we really operate out of multiple hubs, or we really do some of these other things. Those are kind of new insights that we have in addition to a planned process where we plan to engage the community as part of with our consultants to say, to go out to the community, and you can participate in that process to say, what is the vision for this transit system in terms of amenities we want to have at our hubs and on our network and in our system, so that way we can build the criteria first and then study the available space and other criteria, rather than just say, well, we want to just do it based on a data-driven approach that doesn't consider what our community values were.
Can you say who you are for the people at home?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I'm Jessica Mortinger. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner with the MPO.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Follow-up question?
More. So then could we exclude a piece of property if we so choose? I guess I look at it this way. I don't, as a commissioner, I really don't want to go through 21st and Stewart again.
Right. No, we want to engage the commission in development of the criteria. So, I mean, I would say if that would be the will of the commission, then that's a valid option.
Okay.
I would suggest though, that we do want to, as much as possible, approach this with a blank slate.
Yeah.
We don't want to get into the business of picking and choosing, because then we're not really depending on the study process. We're not.
If we're going to commission a group to do a study, let's let them do a study.
Yeah, we want to be genuine to that process, but I understand, the point that you make on that particular location.
Well, I figured I just need to throw it out.
Oh, I understand.
I know you share.
Well, and to your point, we have all the information that you would need if you wanted to make a decision on that particular location. We commissioned follow-up studies, traffic impact analysis and all of that. So I don't think there's necessarily any further need to study that particular location.
And Matt, you're right. If a study is going to happen, we need to have, everything looked at and pick the best site that needs to happen. And I apologize. I didn't mean to say anything out of line, but, I just need to get that out there that, we went through that once and we didn't really go anywhere. So, anyway. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for staff? All right, let's do public comment. Just come on up to the microphone and say your name and sign in as well.
Hi, my name is Travis Robinette. I live at 1402 West 22nd Street, and I'm the chairperson for the newly formed Schwegler Neighborhood Association. And I'm actually here with many of my neighbors tonight. If you'd like to stand up and show the commission who you are. And we, as a neighborhood association, request that you vote to support staff's recommendation for the new transportation hub study. We believe the study will come up with the best answer, not just for our neighborhood, but for the city as a whole. As Mr. Nugent pointed out last month, the criteria for the last study was set without public input. This new study recommended by city staff would include public input from the start, which would result in a better product and a more transparent process. We also have the benefit of up-to-date information, including the Transit Comprehensive Operations Analysis that was accepted last month. For us, spending $10,000 of city funds to identify the best answer for a project that could cost up to $4 million, according to the last study, makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis.
Hello, I'm Holly Joyce. I can't write and talk at the same time. Good evening. I live at 2030 Osdale. I am also the current vice chairperson of the Schwegler Neighborhood Association. The proposed study should consider locating the hub, or one of the hubs, near the city's highest density housing, to include the library, the hospital, health department, healthcare access, Heartland Community Health Center, Burt Nash, the courts, City Hall, and downtown, putting the hub on the opposite side of the KU campus from all of these significant locations that was based on the old study just doesn't make sense to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Holly.
My name is Gene Dorsey. I live at 2038 Emerald Drive, and I'm the secretary of the newly formed Neighborhood Association. I'd like to address some of the concerns expressed by the commissioners at the April meeting regarding this issue. I'll go from my right to left. Commissioner Herbert, in your last campaign, you supported, as I recall, a site where there might be economic development potentials or a public-private partnership of some kind. A new study could consider this because shareholder input would be part of the process at the beginning and not at the end of the study. Commissioner Amix, we appreciate at the last meeting you didn't want to spend the money for the hub study until after the vote on the sales tax extension, but we ask that you support the study now. We do not want to lose the outside funding for the study, and due to time constraints, and we ask that you have faith that the citizens of Lawrence will go ahead and pass the extension on the transit tax. We also think that spending $10,000 of city money is well spent on a project that could cost in the millions of dollars. Mayor Soden, last meeting you expressed the opinion that one central hub might not fully meet the needs of Lawrence. We believe a new study might find that your opinion is supported and it could offer alternative solutions. Vice Mayor Boley, we know that you also expressed concern about the budget issues, but as we explained to Commissioner Amix, we believe this expenditure is worthwhile. And Commissioner Larson, as we indicated to the mayor, because shareholder input will be gathered up front, smaller parcels not considered in the prior study could be considered this time, and these parcels could accommodate a multi-hub model solution. One other thing I thought of, depending on where this thing goes, you may also want to consider looking at the parking study as a part of this, because many of the streets in Lawrence are fairly narrow, and if there's parking on them, there may not be room to run buses and emergency equipment by at the same time. I'll turn it back over to Travis now.
Well, we appreciate your time, and do you have any questions for us?
Any questions for the Schwegler Neighborhood Association?
Congratulations on your new neighborhood association. I think it's
Yeah.
great.
Thank you, Lisa.
We bring people together.
Yes.
Put that on a
Thank you all
bumper.
Good
for
job.
coming out tonight. Any other public comment? Okay. So we'll bring it back to the commission.
Well, I really appreciate staff's memo on this. It was much more thorough about what the differences between the studies would be. So it really helped kind of clarify that. Then also after the last meeting, I met with Bob Nugent after that because I was concerned that maybe I wasn't looking at the whole picture. And I should have done that before the meeting. I apologize for not doing that. But Bob and I had a nice conversation about the first study that was done, how many sites they looked at, like 70-some sites across the city, and what the difference between that study is and what we're doing now. I appreciate that we're looking up front at citizen input. That's extremely important, obviously, and also the idea that it could be a multiple hub situation. So I appreciate that. So I'm in favor of it at this point.
I'm enjoying the moment that my neighborhood association supports a staff recommendation.
It's going to be that long.
So you better hope that study doesn't come back saying 21st and Stewart. They might be out here being mad about us funding the study.
What's your thoughts?
You know, we talked on this last issue about wanting to have the best information possible before we make a choice, and I think this is a situation where we got to collect information, make sure we have the best information possible. It is frustrating to fund a study right after we funded a study. It sometimes feels like we paid for one study and didn't get the answers we wanted, so we'll pay for a new one. Or maybe we got the answers we wanted, and as a commission, we didn't do anything with it. You know, so there's an element of frustration there that we're having to do it again, but I mean, the reality is that we're having to do it again.
Your turn.
What? God. What I did on Tuesday nights before this. You know, if they would have put anybody other than Gene up there, I'd have felt better. You know, if it's for real that we are going to be looking at a fresh slate and we're going to be looking at, you know, potentially every property that this fits or, you know, that could be placed on, I don't have any problem. I think the idea of being able to get a $40,000 grant, I think is justification to be able to do this, to come up with the best information, as Commissioner Herbert said. So I think we proceed and we get it. I do, just so that you all know, I do believe that the vote will be in the positive for the transit. I think it is a very popular service that, you know, is provided in Lawrence, Kansas, and one that a great number of people depend on. So this is part of the process that just needs to happen. So let's do it. Let's just do it.
Well, I'm satisfied with the changes that have been made to the new studies, so I will support it now. Who wants to make a motion?
I move.
Second.
We do the study.
All right, motion made by Vice Mayor Boley, seconded by Commissioner Larson to do the new study. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
All right, so on to item, wait, you guys aren't going to hang out for this part?
Me too.
All right, we're on to item number 10, receive information regarding the process to consider possible expansion of the Catalyst program beyond Lawrence Venture Park and East Hills Business Park.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager. The purpose of the item this evening is for you just to discuss how you wish to process the potential expansion of the Catalyst program that was approved in April to consider areas beyond Lawrence Venture Park and East Hills Business Park. So when you had discussed the staff report as a follow-up to that, there was some discussion about the process to if you wanted to just simply put that back on the commission agenda, or if you wanted to have an advisory board review it in between. I just did want to note that the recommendation for the Catalyst program did come directly to the commission. The Public Incentive Review Committee was not originally involved in the review of that program prior to it coming to the commission. So we have a couple of alternatives laid out for you, and we're just seeking direction at this point from the commission with how you want to process this from this point.
Well, I think that it should go back to PERC, obviously, as it says in the staff memo. I think that, you know, when we were talking about the Catalyst program, to me, I was okay with it because it was tied to a limited geographic area. So I thought that was okay, but now it's opening up, so I feel like now we need to really have more public input into it.
Mayor, a little bit different than where you come down on this is that I believe that it's a program that we're establishing. PERC obviously is going to hear any requests, as I understand it, correct?
Our plan, Commissioner, was to bring that directly back to the commission as a one-step.
Okay, so it never goes there.
Correct.
Well, anyway, it's still it's our project. I think in this particular case, I think it's appropriate that we make the decisions here.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in a level playing field, and if we provide a Catalyst program which doesn't require a PERC review for city-owned property, but then we require our private business owners to operate under a totally different set of rules, that's not right. So if we support this Catalyst program, we need to support it on an equal playing field for everybody.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that it ought to be the same for private and public on any sort of competition. So I'm more supportive just letting it be our program and approve it or not.
It's okay with me?
I guess I feel like I need to clarify when I say that it needs to go to PERC, I'm talking about the policy, not the individual projects. Was that clear before you made your statements? Because it sounded more like you were thinking I was saying that we should send individual projects back to PERC, but I'm talking about expanding the policy, that we should send that to PERC for discussion of the policy, not for individual projects. Does that make more sense now?
Okay, so you don't want to do it, have them look at the original Catalyst program as much as the expanded Catalyst program, correct?
Yes, the policy, to get input. Because that's where we have the school board, the county commissioners. Obviously, the Catalyst program involves skipping components for actual projects, but this is discussion of the policy.
Mayor, all due respect, I think, again, it's our program. I think it's something that I feel very comfortable in doing it at this dais, and I think it should be here at this dais, okay?
Okay. Was that clear to
Yes.
Robert and Larson? Okay. All right, so sounds like I'm the only one that wants more public input. So I guess if someone wants to make a motion.
Well, I think we ought to ask for comment at this point.
Oh, yeah, public comment. Thank you, Vi.
I saw KT back there.
Yeah, KT is here. Sorry, KT.
I have had a few silent meetings, so I'm making up for it. So I'm KT Walsh, speaking only for myself. And I do have some concerns about this being spread to all over the city. I think the Catalyst program is great. I'm so glad you instituted it, and we need it. My my issue is that it becomes another incentive that the city provides now if it goes citywide. And therefore, I think it should stick to our incentives policy that you all and staff and the city has worked really, really hard on. And because of that, I feel like it does need to go before PERC and then come to you. The other thing, we yesterday, knowing this was coming up, studied the industrial sites in East Lawrence and then read the staff report. And it is a little fuzzy. They talk about a rule of thumb would be 25,000 to 75, and I might be misquoting, I'm so sorry if I am, 25,000 to 75,000 square feet, but it doesn't limit it to 25,000 or 75,000 square feet. It's simply a rule of thumb. Therefore, for some of the smaller industrial sites that are scattered around the east side of the city, like you said, we feel like we need a chance for input on opening this up to all industrial in the city and the neighborhoods that will affect. So those were my comments. And wouldn't it be great if someone could come from the city and talk to us about this program at the June 5th East Lawrence meeting and some of the other neighborhood meetings, because this would be affecting us. Thank you.
Might ask Bert about it. All right, any other public comment? Britt, do you have any answers, I guess, to KT's concerns?
I might just,
Okay.
jump in if I can, Mayor. You know, I think in the staff report, what we were trying to do is talk about what the possible impact of the expansion of the program would be beyond East Hills and Lawrence Venture Park. So we were saying that because currently the program requires 25,000 square foot new in East Hills, 75,000 square foot new in Lawrence Venture Park, or a 15,000 square foot addition. What we were saying in the report was the 15,000 square foot addition is pretty hard to determine what properties in the community that are currently zoned IG might be available for that or eligible for that, because there's parking requirements and a variety of other kind of open space requirements. It's harder to ascertain what the impact of that might be. But we believe that if it's limited to a minimum 25,000 square foot new building, that we're only talking about, I believe we indicated 19 lots. And that map that was attached, you know, showed where that current IG zoning was. So it's very few lots that are currently zoned in the city that would be large enough to accommodate a new structure. So there may have not been good clarification in that report, which I apologize for.
But Mayor, it still takes care of the fairness factor that was brought up here.
Yeah, but I think Diane's point is that it is not.
Yeah, it's not.
You kind of talk about across the whole community. It has a governor built into it that restricts the number of lots to 19, 20 lots.
Right.
So it looks like the two alternatives were to send the policy to PERC or to place the expansion issue directly on a city commission meeting agenda. So it sounds like the city commission wishes to do the latter alternative. Do we need a vote for that, I guess, is the question.
Just give us direction by motion. I think that would be fine.
Okay. Would someone like to make that motion to give staff that direction?
I would move that we place it directly on a commission agenda.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Herbert, seconded by Commissioner Amix. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Motion passes unanimous. Or not unanimous. Motion passes 4-1.
Sure
I'm
it did.
tired.
You
Sorry,
can't-
guys.
Can't take it back.
4-1. 4-1. All right, so onward to consider motion to recess into executive session for approximately 15 minutes for the purpose of consultation with attorneys for the city about matters deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship. The justification for the executive session is to keep attorney-client matters confidential at this time. At the end of the executive session, the City Commission will resume its regular meeting in the City Commission room. So I will make
So
the
moved.
motion.
Second.
Seconded by Vice Mayor Boley. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimous. 15 minutes. Kurt, are you over there? Is Kurt over there? Yeah. Okay, thanks, Kurt. All right, so we'll bring it back. We don't have anything to report. Next up is commission items.
I guess I'd like to say that we lost a mayor today. Dick Rainey, who was mayor 50 years ago, has died. I got to know Dick when I started campaigning for this office, and I learned about some of what he did when he was mayor, and one of the things that was truly significant was the work that he did with Ray Wells, who was the city manager at the time, and the other commissioners, to bring forward a fair housing ordinance that we'll commemorate in a couple of months. And I know Mike's known Dick for a long time. He was just a wonderful guy and a leader in a lot of ways for Lawrence, and we benefited from it. So I just got a call this afternoon saying that he died and wanted to share that. I think Scott Wagner provided us with a copy of the transcript of the oral history that Dick did as part of this observance of the fair housing ordinance. So, thanks.
You know, I've been attending the community events for the 50 years of fair housing all this past year, and Mayor Rainey attended several of those, and to hear him talk, come up right from his mouth, what it was like and how it occurred was just an honor. And it was just very nice to be able to hear it from his voice.
You know, knowing Dick, and Vice Mayor, I appreciate you bringing it up. You know, I've known Dick and the Rainey family ever since I was a little kid, from the time that my mother worked in his little snack bar inside Rainey's drugstore when I was a little kid, and so to be able to see him as a young man, you know, when I was a lot younger, but see what he meant to our community, not only as a city commissioner and mayor, but as a downtown business person too, where I think Rainey's drugstore is where we bought all of our back-to-school supplies when I was a kid in those boxes, you know, everything. Always tried to get extra clay, but it didn't work. But no, Dick was one of those special people in downtown, and somebody that I really appreciated, you know, knowing over time, and really what he meant to me. And there are a whole lot of people in our community that probably have housing today because of Dick Rainey.
Mm-hmm. We're a better community.
Yeah, we are.
Any other items? Okay, so now we're on to the city manager's report.
I have a couple items tonight. First two are on the processes to replace two of our department heads. As you know, Ernie Shaw will be retiring as the interim Parks and Rec director. At this point, we had received 75 applications to fill that position. 13 applicants were invited to participate in pre-interview written exercises. 7 have been selected to go on to the next stage, and we'll be doing interviews actually tomorrow. Staff anticipates inviting 3 individuals back to participate in on-site interviews, and we have community members who will have the opportunity to meet the candidates during the open house meet and greet on Tuesday, June 27th from 6 to 8 p.m. hosted in the Legacy Room at the Sports Pavilion, Lawrence. We anticipate extending an offer in early summer. In the case of the police chief process, we received 31 applicants for that position. I don't want you to feel like that's a low number. In fact, in checking with some consultants, I have found that actually there's other communities that have actually received fewer applicants than that. I think it's a difficult position to fill, and so you shouldn't feel that that's the low number. And I would tell you that I think we have some very good candidates in the group that's moving forward. 11 candidates were selected to participate in the pre-interview in this case. 8 candidates were selected to advance to the first round. And we have since narrowed the group down to 4 that will participate in on-site interviews, and that will be held June 15th and 16th. We have 2 community panels and a city staff panel that will be doing the interviews. We will have a meet and greet that will occur at the Carnegie Building, and that will occur on June 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. And when you go to those meet and greets, you'll have an opportunity to fill out kind of an evaluation scorecard on the candidates, and that information will be transferred to me and the management team prior to making a decision on who the next police chief will be or who the next park and rec director will be. So that's kind of our process. I wanted to get that out publicly and let you know what the status of that is, because you're going to see some retirement functions coming up for those individuals, and it's an obvious question to ask, well, how are we doing with filling those positions? In terms of affordable housing guidance related to the city economic development policy, staff has prepared a quick reference guide relating to the income eligibility limits and the rent limits for affordable housing units, both rental and ownership. City Commission and Affordable Housing Advisory Board was to limit the consideration of student status for eligibility for affordable housing in line with the restrictions in place with the Housing Authority. Such restrictions are also in line with federal regulations which require a student to be at least 24 years old and is either a veteran, is married, has a dependent child, or files an individual tax return. Just a quick comment on the report you received regarding monthly utility billing. Since implementing the new online payment portal and absorbed fee model, we have seen a 33% decrease in payments made at the counter and a 21% decrease in payments sent through the mail. So people are using this new opportunity to be online and make their payments. And then there's below is a table for transaction totals for each type of payment. So you can see that in that report. No comments really on the fire medical report, but under Junior Olympics, just a couple things to report. It's the 29th anniversary, no, on Junior Olympics. Just let me track that down first. According to Bob Sanner, he's working with the USA Track and Field and various sports agents to add to the list of track Olympians who will make appearances in Lawrence during the Junior Olympics. We have received commitments from Ashton Eaton and Carl Lewis. For those who don't know who they are, Ashton Eaton is a 2-time Olympic champion in the decathlon and holds world records in the decathlon and the heptathlon. Yeah, whatever. It's late.
It is late.
And that is an event that actually has 7 individual events, not unlike the decathlon, and I think that's an event that's held inside. Heptathlon. And then Carl Lewis. And Carl Lewis was a prolific Olympic gold medal winner, silver medal winner, bronze medal winner. They should be big attractions for us during this Junior Olympics, and really to get to see people that compete at the level that those individuals did. And I think they're working on more individuals as well. Bob indicates that he's meeting with groups in Lawrence, Topeka, and Kansas City to secure volunteer commitments. They have identified more than 100 volunteer positions that they must fill for each day of the event. Griffin Payments and Harbor Touch portal has been completed and is live. In fact, the LSC's first online sale occurred last week with the purchase of 2 7-day passes. And after meeting with Scott McCullough and other staff members, they have determined that LSC's temporary parking plan on the Mercado property is feasible. And I think they've planned for an additional 300 cars parking near Rock Chalk, and they're getting that all lined up. Okay, Junior Olympics is taken care of. And then the outdoor sculpture program that I was confused by. The 29th anniversary of the exhibition is scheduled this year. Grace Peterson, the Arts Service Coordinator for the Salina Arts and Humanities Department and KU alum and former Lawrence residents, reviewed 23 proposals and artwork submitted by 15 artists and selected 8 artworks for this year's eclectic exhibition. The opening reception and walking tour for the will begin at Buford Watson Park near 7th and Kentucky, starting at 5:30 p.m. on Friday, June 23rd. The tour and reception are open to the public, and Grace Peterson will be on hand to share her insights. And then in terms of future agenda items, on 6/6 we have planned a presentation of the draft comprehensive parking study report. Brandon will be overseeing that and spend a lot of time working on that. The 2016 financial audit presentation, and the East Lawrence rezoning of multiple properties to align with the property's current use with the zoning districts that contain the appropriate density and intensity standards to support the uses. And then on 6/13, the work session will feature the 2018 budget, wherein we hope to have the updated revenue projections so that you can see that and how the budget continues to look after the original presentation. So that's all I have in terms of manager report.
All right, thank you.
Tom, I hate to be picky, but actually I don't. But the Grace Peterson
Yes.
with the Arts Service, that's Salina, Kansas, not Salina, Kansas.
Salina.
Yeah. Those folks out there get pretty upset when you don't.
You have to drive the speed limit there too, Tom.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. I'll be on a bike before long.
All right, so on to calendar. The items that need to be added.
Mayor, there is one item here we were hoping that you could provide us a little bit of direction on. It seems like a long time ago, but in November, you all approved the meeting calendar for this year. And at that meeting, you approved us to have a meeting on July 18th at the Watkins Museum. This is in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Fair Housing Ordinance. And the group that is planning that wanted a little bit more feedback. A couple things have happened since November. One of them is, of course, the July 4th meeting won't be held, and there was a decision to make sure that both of those meetings that will be held in July will be regular meetings, so we'll have a regular agenda in addition to the consent agenda on those dates. So there's a couple of options if you all wanted to sort of hold the entire meeting at Watkins and begin at 5:45, we could do that. But of course, we won't have the logistics or the head-end equipment to broadcast that evening, so that would be something that you would want to be aware of. They were also planning some activities for people maybe after the ceremonial piece, and if you have the full meeting, that may be best to be held on a different night so that you all could participate as well. Another option might be to start the meeting at 5 o'clock at Watkins, recess the meeting then and reconvene back here either at 5:45 or say 6:35 or whatever time that you set, so that you can participate in some of the activities if they're scheduled that evening. So we're just kind of looking at any thoughts that you all have about how you wanted to handle it since we are getting into summertime now.
I don't remember what the significance of Watkins was.
It's where the original ordinance was signed.
Oh, I see.
So we're returning to the historic City Hall. I guess my preference would be to start early for those of us who could come, and then recess and come here for the balance of the meeting.
I think it's pretty important that we maintain a broadcast.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can, do the ceremonial thing, have a few activities, and then come here and do the
So
meeting.
do you want to start down there at 5 and then come back here to meet at 6:35? You want to have that big of a time in between, or would you
I
rather
don't think
just
we need
move?
that much time.
6?
Yeah, how much,
Six.
yeah, what
Yeah.
kind of time do we
Yeah.
need?
Yeah, how much time do we need then?
They were planning, there should be a little sheet in front of you. There were, on one side that has the picture there, these were some things that the group was talking about. They were going to have some remarks by participants from 1967, an unveiling of a mobile display in the museum. So they were going to have a reception there and that kind of
I guess
thing.
my concern, Diane, is I think there are some people who are coming in from out of town,
Mm-hmm,
so that it'd be good to be able to do the event
that day.
that day.
Okay,
Um,
so I'm hearing, start at 5, but then have it adjourn and start
And
here
we
at
can leave, and they
6.
can continue to do that, but I think 5 and 6 would work fine.
Sound good to everyone?
Sounds good.
We will plan on that. Thank you.
All right, any other calendar items?
I would move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Herbert to adjourn, seconded by Commissioner Amix. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes unanimously.